Hello everyone, good morning, and you are warmly welcome to the Deloitte Economic Dialogue session. My name is Gloria Boydeku, a partner with Deloitte, and I'll be co-emceeing today's session with my colleague, Dennis Brown, a senior manager with the Financial Advisory Service line. So the Deloitte Economic Dialogue is our flagship program that seeks to bring together resources from industry, academia, and practice to discuss government fiscal policies and provide the needed platform for industry players to contribute to the discussion. Today's section is a hybrid program. We are joined by over 600 participants online. So in order to have a fruitful discussion, we would like to go through some quick housekeeping rules. So to those of us in-house, in the auditorium, may I kindly request that we put our phones on mute. So let's pick our phones quickly and put them on mute. To our participants online, you have been muted. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A chat box, and during the Q&A section, your questions will be attended to, or you could use the raise hand button, raise your hand, and you will be called to ask your question. We would always encourage you to participate by dropping your comments and contributions in the comment section, and they will be considered accordingly. To those of us in here, the washroom is when you go out, the first right, you turn right again, and the second door, that should be the washroom. We have the QR codes printed on the tables. Kindly take your phones, scan them, and you will have the program outlined for the day. Without taking much time, I would like to yield the floor to our country managing partner and the person of Dan Owusu, who is the host for today's program, to give us the welcome address. Let's welcome Dan.
Good morning. Distinguished guests, colleagues, honored participants, a warm welcome to the Deloitte Economic Dialogue, an occasion of insightful conversation and knowledge sharing. Today we gather here and all united in our pursuit of driving positive change and fostering growth within the Ghana's economy. But before I continue, let me express my heartfelt gratitude to our invited speakers and panelists, Honorable Abna Osei Asare, Prof. Godfred Balkin, and Adubia Asiamwa Abuaje for honoring our invitation. And to all of you here present and those online, for taking your time to be part of this significant gathering. Your presence here underscores your commitment to driving progress and prosperity in our nation. And we are honored that you are here with us. About the 2023 media budget event, and that has already been said by Gloria. This annual event has become a vital platform for thought leaders, industry experts, and policymakers to provide insight into economic direction for the country for the year by reviewing monetary and fiscal policies as well as other key initiatives of the government. The theme for this media budget event is Positioning for Sustainable Recovery, Ghana's Economic Outlook post-IMF deal. We have adopted a proactive approach by organizing this event ahead of the government media budget reading. It's expected to be read sometime next week or thereabout. Hopefully, it gets read. By inviting the Honorable Minister for Finance, we aim to ensure that our suggestions that we make today will get noticed and will get considered in the budget process. Positioning Ghana for sustainable recovery. From the past 2 years, efforts have been made which have been targeted at putting the economy on the path of recovery. And with the progress made in reaching an agreement with IMF so far, the path to recovery has begun. To optimize the benefit of the program, it is essential to work towards sustainable recovery. As we journey towards sustainable recovery, government should support businesses to remain strong. So the debt exchange program, which was a key part of the IMF program, had some effect and challenges on some businesses. The financial institutions, you can talk about the banks, some of them were hard hit. Our recommendation is that government should allow businesses to carry forward losses suffered from the DDEP for tax purposes for the next 5 years instead of 3 years as captured in the 2022 program. Sustainable recovery should be based on locally initiated flagship programs. The IMF has underscored that the achievement of our economic recovery program hinges on fostering collaboration. To safeguard progress achieved, it is important that we drive our recovery and growth agenda through locally initiated flagship programs. One district, one factory, planting for food and jobs, Ghana Cares, You Start. Those are local programs. Those are the ones that we think should be sustained for economic recovery. These initiatives empower our local industries and draw upon the expertise of diverse local technocrats, academics, and professionals, fostering sustainable growth across various sectors. Foster growth on non-traditional sectors through continuous government-private sector collaboration. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted crucial role of non-traditional sectors such as service, pharmaceuticals, and technology in building a resilient economy. To ensure long-term economic growth beyond the IMF program, deliberate effort should be prioritized in the development of these non-traditional sectors. Promoting continuous collaboration between the government and the private sector is essential for fostering growth and competitiveness in the economy. Emphasis should be placed on positioning these sectors to leverage on the opportunities that are presented by the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFTA, for regional market expansion. In conclusion, I urge all of you to actively engage in this discussion and this dialogue. Our ideas, our experiences, and insights are invaluable to shaping the collective understanding of the opportunities and challenges that lies ahead. Let us seize this moment and let us seize this opportunity to build a better, more prosperous future for our beloved Ghana. Once again, thank you for being here today, and let us commence this Deloitte dialogue with enthusiasm, with passion, and share our commitment in driving to Ghana in a sustainable recovery way. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning once again, and thank you very much, Dan, for your insightful address. I believe it has set the context for our discussions today. But what would do further justice to that context is this upcoming insightful presentation from our guest speaker, Professor Godfred Bokpin, who is an economics and professor of finance at the University of Ghana. So let's welcome Prof. Bokpin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Godfred. I'm a teacher on a government payroll. My employer is here, so I'm going to be very professional. Yes. So thank you, Honorable Minister. You have, there's one thing I've learned from you, that in hard times, you can keep emotional stability. You have been very stable, and I think that's a lesson from these economic issues. Thank you also, Deloitte, for inviting me and all the invited guests and then participants. So certainly our Deloitte partner had told us that the recovery has started. So, especially from where he's coming from. So I will not say it has not started. We don't have an idea totally what this recovery looks like. We have no idea, so even when we get there, we may not be able to tell that we are there. But what I'm trying to do this morning is to try and give a certain picture of what the recovery should address, that it should respond to. So my presentation, I will look a bit of the outline, and then I will move to the main issue. Can we go to the next slide? It's good to start off this way. Ghana, Malaysia, Singapore, 1957 to early 60s. Perhaps choosing which country to dwell in wasn't a problem, because in GDP per capita terms, we were almost the same. In fact, Ghana's GDP per capita in 1961, 62, 63 was higher than that of South Korea. But that is what you see today. The gap between where Malaysia is and where Ghana is, and where Singapore is and where Ghana is quite wide. I'm sure you'll be more than 75 times better off being in Malaysia or Singapore today than being in Ghana. This is not an advice to relocate from this country. All that I'm saying is that we can do better. We can have better aspirations that should motivate us to get there, because we were once at the same level at some point, and that is where they are. We can go to the next slide quite quickly. There is a narrative that the gap between Ghana and Malaysia, Ghana and Singapore, is simply because Ghana is not generating enough tax revenue relative to the size of our economy. My position this morning is that that is not true. That if you look at, let's go to the next slide. If you look at the tax to GDP ratio of Malaysia and look at the tax to GDP ratio of Singapore, it has been below 17% consistently. At some point in time, their tax to GDP ratio was lower than that of Ghana. We had reached 17% at some point in time. What does this tell us? What this tells us is that these countries have developed on the back of efficiency, lean government, low-cost approach. We have chosen the opposite. So, and even if you do the modeling with the Ghana's tax to GDP ratio, the level of economic outcome that should deliver, the gap is very wide. How do we explain the gap? If you look at it from 1992, and you look at the governance cost, which is not productivity enhancing, and you compare that to the fiscal allocation to growth enhancing spending, you see that Ghana's own is disproportionately towards governance costs. And governance costs, you can explain that through maybe Article 71 holders. Percentage-wise may not be that much, but look at it across ministries, departments, agencies, state-owned enterprises. The fiscal allocation that takes leaves very little for growth-enhancing spending. And that is why you see we practically don't have fiscal space, but we have huge infrastructure deficit. Ghana practically doesn't have roads. So if anybody told you that we have constructed roads, where are those roads? The average worker is spending more than 3 hours to get to work. We are spending more of our time in traffic than we actually spend in the office. 80% of what we call economic activity is movement. Movement of capital, labor, services. So any system that restricts movement has great economic cost. And we should be looking at that. So in as much as we need to scale up revenue, I think the argument should be that we should be looking at efficiency, we should be looking at ways to address corruption, we should be adopting lean government. That is the only way we can free up space for the private sector to grow. And since 1992, actually not 1992, if you look at it from independence, the way we have designed our economic system is just to make government comfortable. And that is at the expense of households and private sector. And that is why anytime the government balance sheet is impaired, repairing it imposes cost on households and private sector balance sheet. And you see that tax revenue is not enough. So the state now is after your savings, it's after your investment. Call that one under haircuts. After a while, when there's no more hair, the head will be cut. And I think that we need to, and where I have an issue is this. The problem is largely governance. The solution cannot be largely economic and financial. If the problem is largely governance, the solution must be largely what? Governance. So what we need to do urgently, and we cannot expect that governance reform to come from the IMF. What Ghana needs to do to have a future we all can be proud of is to initiate those governance reforms. It will be painful, it will be trade-off, but that is the way we need to do it, to complement the financial and economic reforms, largely fiscal, in the IMF-supported program. Other than that, the imbalances will continue to weigh on us heavily. Let's move on to the next one quite quickly. So, because of the governance costs, lack of attention to agriculture, you could see that we started off as an agrarian economy. Now, the contribution of agriculture to GDP is going down. But that is not strange. As the economy grows, you see movement shifting. But following the Asian economic transformation, we skip industry and move straight to where? Service. But Ghana is not known for service. We are not known for service. The sub-component of the service that is driving this contribution is actually retail and wholesale, largely goods and service selling. So if your industry is not doing well, then the bulk of that will be driven by import and then what? That's all. So this is Ghana's missing middle. Any recovery we are talking about today must address this missing middle. And actually, the World Bank is telling us that by 2040, the AFCFTA alone will add about 7% of our GDP to our GDP by 2040. That is predicated on manufacturing. But if you look at the growth in the manufacturing sector, it has been negative. Okay, any country that is not manufacturing, that is recording negative growth, or the manufacturing sector is not doing well, it means that you are not adding value, actually, to your economy. And the world thrives on margins. The countries that develop, they developed on the basis of margins. You only get margins if you are adding value. If you are not adding value, you are not getting margins. And you can only add value if your manufacturing sector is strengthened. We don't have that. So once we are importing, the true implication is that we are exporting jobs to these countries where we are importing from, and in exchange, we are importing their unemployment into our country. And you see what the statistics shows. But of course, it's not peculiar to only Ghana. You see that across Africa as well in terms of the missing middle. So, and part of this is why our food inflation is also very high, right? So it's a reflection of the lack of attention practically in the area of agriculture, agribusiness, and agro-processing. And actually, if you look at that value chain, it represents one of the dominant job creation capacity of our economy. Because if you look at it from the social accounting metrics, the income multiplier, the output multiplier, employment multiplier of agriculture productivity growth is higher. And the inequality reducing effect of agricultural productivity is very high. So if you want to narrow inequality, if you want to solve poverty, that is the way to start from, because food is a human right issue. Because increasingly, a large number of Ghanaians go to bed not being sure where their next meal will come from. And that is quite a challenge, and we need to address that. And to solve the African basic problem, you don't need to give them an estate. Basic food, quality, cheap, accessible. And you see what the data tells us. Maybe we should go to the next slide. I can skip this. You see that across Africa, okay, we have abandoned agriculture, agribusiness, and agro-processing. And it's the reason why when the conflict started in Ukraine, Africa wept more than Ukraine. Right? And it's the reason we're pleading for Russia to stop firing guns that we can feed our people. But it's the same continent that has more than 60% of the world's unused arable land. And the two largest rivers and lakes in the world are all in Africa. And Africa's net food import in 2015 was over $35 billion. And this is projected to hit $110 billion by 2025. It's this same data that Russia, Ukraine, and others will use to transform their economies, because there's a hungry population on a certain continent that needs to be what? Fed. And that, if you can reduce that by 20%, that is demand. So one of the things that Ghana can leverage on within the African continental free trade is to look at the food value chain. Agribusiness, agro-processing is very, very important. Of course, we are not going to claim who has the best right over jollof rice, but when you see Ghana's jollof rice, you know this is from Ghana, right? And we can easily WhatsApp it to any country. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. So what is the result of this missing middle? So you see, let's go back. As we speak, 1.75 million Ghanaians are unemployed as at the third quarter of 2022. 1.5 million of Ghana's economically active population are out of work. So whatever recovery we are talking about today, I'm looking forward to it that next year by this time, 2 years by this time, if I get the opportunity to do a similar presentation, the content will change. We are no longer going to celebrate GDP growth because that is not sufficient. We are looking at recovery that is backed by job-rich growth. The days when we celebrate GDP growth is over. The days we celebrate wholesale economic growth is over. We are looking at job-rich growth. And we have to be deliberate about engineering growth from the labor-intensive subsectors of the economy that create jobs. That will go beyond general policies. That will require targeted policies. And then we look at how we monitor the recovery from that side. If you look at Ghana's GDP growth, actually, between 2013 and 2019, nearly 20% of the GDP growth Ghana had came from mining. Meanwhile, within that same period, job creation from that mining actually went down. So we are celebrating growth that is largely jobless. That group only put more money in the pocket of few people, whilst the majority, whilst inequality widens. That is not sustainable growth. That is not inclusive growth. So let's go to the next slide. Then you see what is happening. So even those who are employed, of course, the good news is that we saw vulnerable employment declining from actually Q2 to Q3. So vulnerable employment stands right now at 63.6% per Ghana Statistical Service data. But you see that vulnerable unemployment is high among females compared to what? To males. Okay, so whatever policy we are putting in place must have that dimension, a gender dimension as well. because they bear the brunt. In hard times, a lot of men are not responsible. You are an exception. Okay, in hard times, we leave the burden for the females, is that not so? And of course, I'm not talking from experience. Yeah. We can go to the next one. Okay. So this is, we've seen inequality widen. We can skip this. Okay. So you see Ghana's inflation. Of course, the process, we thought that the process of disinflation had become entrenched. But we saw a bit of a surprise in May, and then June inflation also rose marginally to 42.5%. That is very high. In fact, it's one of the highest in Africa, right? And we need to, our recovery must address this sustainably. But let's go to the next slide and see what the dimensions are. So you see that food inflation is very high. As at June, was 54.2%, as compared to non-food inflation. Then if you look at the disaggregation, you see that imported inflation, food inflation is very high. Okay, this is also largely a reflection of lack of our attention in the area of agriculture, agribusiness, and agro-processing. But the real effect, when you see inflation rising like this, of course, you also see the regional differences. You see marginality across regions. And of course, inflation varies from country to country, of course, from district to district, region to region, and from individuals as well. So all of us, as we are sitting here, we carry different inflation rates, because your inflation may be different from mine, because your inflation is a reflection of your consumption basket. And once we don't consume the same goods or in the same proportion, then we all carry different inflations. Regardless of the marginality in the inflations, you see that is very high. Then you see some regions, the Northeast, food inflation, 79%. Western North, Eastern, Bono East, and the rest of them. So you see differences. You see that it's harder for some people in some other part of the country than other areas. So we need to look at that. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, I can skip this. So then you see our tax handles. And one of the passionate appeals I want to make is that in the media review, the government should take a bold decision and merge the standard VAT rate with the straight levies. If it quakes like a duck, let's not call it a duck. Let's not call it a dog. It's a duck. Let's merge it. Let's peg it at below 18%, and let's ensure greater compliance. Okay, we will be better off with that. Because if your VAT rate is more than 17%, it's counterproductive. So even though we have segregated the VAT, some standard VAT rate, say that one is 15%, whilst the straight levy is 6%, effectively the incidence of that VAT on the final consumer is more than 21%, and that is counterproductive. So there's a policy signal that we are going for lower tax rate, but then there's a backdoor approach actually to increase the tax burden. And you see it across consumption-based tax handles and then the corporate income tax as well. So you see the corporate income tax as maybe 25%, but then there is, for the banking sector, there's banking sector recovery levy, then there's also growth and sustainability levy and all of that. I think that we need to offer some kind of predictability and consistency, which is also good for businesses. But when you see VAT is that high, and then you see inflation is that high, the impact on households, let's go to the next slide, is very, very high. Why is that so high? Because the data is that, even from Ghana here, between 42% and 44% of household expenditure in Ghana is on food. So when food inflation is that high, it tells you the impact is what? Is very high. Okay. And this mirrors also the story in Africa. So to make life comfortable for the average Ghanaian, food, because that is what consumes a bigger portion of their disposable income. Okay, and we are not talking about even they eating 3 square meals a day. 3 square meals a day is like eating 9, right? 3 squared is 9. Every meal has a starter, main, and dessert. For some people, it's just carbohydrate routes. It's not sustainable. Let's move on to the next one. So whatever recovery we are thinking about must address this, and Africa has no excuse, including Ghana. But I can skip this, and then let's go to the... Any recovery we are talking about must also address climate change. And the last slide, the next slide. And any recovery Ghana is talking about must address galamsey. Our recovery will be largely insufficient if you and I cannot go back to our communities in the village and happily drink from the waters that fed us once in our lifetime. If I cannot go back to my village and catch fish from the same river that sustained my life when I was young, Ghana failed last year. So any recovery we are talking about must be environmentally friendly. And that is where sustainability is going to come from. We cannot sit in Accra. In fact, actually, if you see rural food inflation, if you see vulnerable employment in the rural areas today, because the ecosystem underpinned by water that supports life in the rural areas today is increasingly at risk. And we cannot blame an external force for this. So any recovery we are talking about, we must all agree that in the next 6 months, when we go to our communities, our villages, we should be able to drink water from the rivers with some level of risk. We pray before, during, and after, and we should be fine. Because the reality is that Ghana is living less and less sustainably because we are undermining our common future. So the recovery we are talking about, if we had a fair idea, must enable the current generation to meet our development aspirations without compromising the ability of the next generation to also live sustainably. And there's a way to do it. And what we have chosen is not the way to do it. So then in the next 3 years, of course, with an extension in mind, what is going to shape our discussion is the IMF. And of course, it's our 17th time. And we've said it that, interestingly, Ghana's 17th IMF-supported program was approved on May 17th. Averagely, every 3 years and some few months, we've had to go to the fund. But the fund cannot address the issues that you and I must tackle as a nation, because the best helping hand we can find is at the end of our own arm. We must be conscious, we must be deliberate in terms of what outcome we want and what initiatives we need to put in place, largely governance reforms, productivity-enhanced reform that can address that. But I can skip this, and then maybe this is not date of birth of some people. This reflects when Ghana went to the IMF and when we exited, right? But as I check, and I looked at the development space, I look at how many times Malaysia, Singapore, and others have been to the fund. But I think that we need to take another look at what we can do to complement the IMF-supported program. That is where sustainability will come from. I'm sure we are all aware what the building blocks are in the IMF program, but let's skip it because of time. We are hoping that we can reach a primary surplus of 1.5% of GDP maybe by 2026. If you look at where Ghana's debt to GDP ratio is, and if you want to reduce it to, let's say, 55% by 2028, then the primary surplus we need to record will be more than 8%. And actually, on the continent, no country has been able to deliver a primary surplus of more than 1.5% sustainably. So what that immediately tells you is that if Ghana wants to reach debt sustainability, then debt restructuring is unavoidable. There's a certain level of fiscal deficit that reduces your debt to GDP ratio. We call it debt-reducing fiscal deficit, when your primary balance enters a positive zone. Right? So the gap in bringing our debt to GDP ratio to a more sustainable level is beyond what fiscal adjustment alone can deliver. And that is why debt restructuring seems unavoidable. Right? And it's not only that. In the debt sustainability dimension, we look at a triangle approach, the fiscal adjustment, then we also look at maybe structural reform, and then debt restructuring. We need to look at that triangle effectively. Let's move on to the next one. So this is the program. Because the narrative is that our problem is largely lack of revenue. And therefore, the program is heavily based on revenue enhancement. And that has implications for available cash flow to private sector and households, right? And therefore, the revenue adjustment component is to deliver 3% of GDP by 2026. And then the expenditure adjustment component is supposed to deliver 2%. So in the next 5 years, in the next 3 years or so, fiscal adjustment cumulatively is supposed to deliver 5%. And that is below the 12% that we needed to restore debt sustainability. And that is why debt restructuring is important, right? Now, if you do the modeling, and if we were to go at this pace, then there is no way Ghana will be able to achieve debt sustainability by 2028. In bringing debt to GDP ratio in present value terms to less than 55% by 2028, we cannot. So possibly one way would be, how do we get extension, working with the IMF, that what the cutoff date will be such that we may not be able. If we want to do that, then the level of fiscal adjustment that we have to do will be very, very high. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, I've explained this. So because of that, I want to increase revenue per GDP to 18.7% by 2026 from below 13%. Now, if you want to increase your revenue by even 1 percentage point of GDP, it requires a lot of adjustment. And this is at a time, so there are different levels at which cash flows is being collected from households and private sector. So there's one level where you have direct taxes. Then there's another level where you have debt restructuring. Remember, the debt restructuring is becoming one of the lucrative tax handle. If you look at the fiscal savings, of course, in proportion to GDP, we have not made a lot of progress. But what we know is that the first round of debt restructuring didn't achieve much, because effectively we have just restructured just about 83.3 billion cedis of our total domestic debt of around 259.2 or so billion cedis. If you take the treasury bill component, because that has been excluded, which is around 30-something billion cedis. So that tells you that we have quite a lot of grounds to cover in our debt restructuring in order to make the much needed progress. Let's move on to the next one. Then, whilst we have been talking about expenditure cuts, the kind of all right, thank you. So these are the kind of expenditure cuts programmed in the IMF-supported program. So the 2% we spoke about earlier, the fiscal savings will come from lowering capital expenditures. In other words, we are looking at CAPEX. But Ghana needs to spend more in those areas in reducing the infrastructure deficit. But that is the areas that we are cutting. And actually, if you look at it, the next 4 years, 5 years, unless something extraordinary happens, we may not be able to sustainably add to our capital stock, infrastructure stock, because we don't have the fiscal space. And we have to be intentional in creating the fiscal space. That can only be done if we look at governance reforms, shrink the cost of operationalizing our democracy so we can free up space for growth-enhancing spending. That is the only way we can give meaning to private sector as engine of growth. That is the only way we can increase economic transformation and boost inclusive productivity growth. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to see where that growth is going to come from. Then let's move on to the next. So, of course, we see that under the program, probably the earliest we can go to the Eurobond market will be 2027, right? But my focus is not here. Let's move on to the next one. You look at it here. So if you talk about fiscal consolidation, there are 3 yardsticks: the pace, the mix, and the financing. So the pace can be front-loaded, meaning that we want the adjustment to be done within the shortest possible time. So we chose front-loaded fiscal consolidation approach. And we actually started some of those adjustments as prior actions. Then the next important level is the mix. Are you doing solely expenditure-based fiscal consolidation or revenue-based fiscal consolidation? We are doing both. So we are doing both. Then the next important thing is the financing. So when the program is designed, you cost it because it will require money to translate it into actual. If you look at the financing gap, and also especially in terms of balance of payment support, the financing gap is more than $10 billion. The total financing gap is approximately $15 billion. The IMF, with all their talk and their name being on the program, is only giving us $3 billion in the next 3 years. That's just about 20% of the financing gap. Where would the rest come from? The World Bank will give us maybe around 1.5 billion, the African Development Bank, and the rest of them. But look at the interesting thing. We are expecting that almost $10.5 billion of this financing gap is going to come from external debt restructuring, relief from external debt restructuring. Is that not too much of asking from creditors? Right. Okay, so what that also tells you is that if we don't make progress in our debt restructuring discussions, then largely there is risk in implementing the IMF-supported program, because the bulk of the financing is really dependent on how the progress we make with our external, in terms of the external debt, we have external bilateral and then external commercial. Very soon we'll see what the dynamics look like from that point. Okay, so there's risk here. There's risk here. And that the program itself in the net financing arrangement is way beyond our control. And it depends largely on the progress we make with our external debt restructuring. For the external bilateral, it could come in the form of debt relief or fresh funding, commitment. Again, a lot depends on what the external people will do going forward. Then let's move on to the... So you can see this is the total external debt as at the end of 2022. Of course, this is started from the Ministry of Finance. The total external bilateral is 5.4 billion. Then external commercial, 14.6 billion, right? Our total external debt is 30.5 billion. Multilateral is 8.1. So guess what? The IMF was encouraging us to restructure our debt. The IMF and the World Bank, the multilateral institutions, says that their debt is not up for restructuring. So this is ring-fenced. So the total eligible bonds available for restructuring is around $20 billion. That's around 66% of our total external debt. And probably out of this, we are looking at a relief in excess of 10 billion. Okay. If we restrict that solely to just haircuts, it gives you an idea of the level of haircuts. But of course, if we look at the mix in terms of fresh funding that we could get from our external bilateral donor partners, then the dynamics changes a bit. I'm just telling that whatever recovery Ghana is looking at, whatever future we want to have, we must be in a position to also implement it. Okay? And the only way to do so cannot be just generating more revenue and more revenue without looking at lean government approach to how we do things, without reducing our governance costs. If we don't do that, it's going to be difficult to have a future. We will be unique to do the same thing and expect a different outcome. No. Then let's go to the domestic debt. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. So this is the domestic debt. As at the end of 2022, you have total domestic debt 259.2 billion, the treasury bill component 34.2, and then this is the rest. So far, we had only restructured 85% of 98 billion of the domestic debt, translating to about 83.3 billion cedis. So there's still a lot of progress, and I'm sure you've seen why the ministry is still active in the market, because there's the pension funds, 29.2 billion, there's the cocoa bill, 8.1 billion, there's the dollar denominated in the domestic market, 800 million, you also have the local bonds, and then Bank of Ghana then decided to take the government on its balance sheet. The effect of that is 77.6 billion cedis. Okay. It's very difficult to bring down inflation under such a regime. Okay, so on one hand, you increase policy rate. On another hand, this is the liquidity dimension, right? And actually, you can't blame the central bank that much, because it's almost always difficult to bring inflation down when your public debt is very high and the fiscal regime is weak, especially under inflation targeting. Because one key requirement for inflation targeting to be effective is fiscal discipline, which is outside the central bank. So if you don't guarantee the central bank fiscal discipline, there's no way they can use monetary policy effectively to bring down inflation and engineer growth. In the standard economic theory, you pursue monetary policy and fiscal policy as complementary. But what you see in Ghana, because of the fiscal indiscipline, is that we are using monetary policy as a broom to sweep the mess created by the fiscal side. And here we are talking about the political economy, which is very strong, because that's where the power is. In Ghana, if you win election, you have the power, you have everything, you have the knowledge, you have everything. That cannot work. So we are pursuing monetary policy as subordinate to fiscal policy. We are not seeing that complementary effect, and that is problematic. So, colleagues, whatever recovery Ghana is looking at, whatever growth we are aspiring under this recovery must be job-rich, must offer debt sustainability, must guarantee private sector leadership, which will be a basis for economic transformation and improved productivity growth. And let's take it this way. Macroeconomic stability is not an end in itself. Since 1992, all that Ghana has been battling with is macroeconomic what? Stability. We get that small, we mess it up, and then we have to go through a painful process to restore macroeconomic what? Stability. Because when you mess up your economy, when you create economic disruptions, the cost of restoring it tends to be very high. And you cannot easily just jumpstart growth or bottom out easily. It's going to come at a price. And the price is heavy now, right? So how do we guarantee macroeconomic stability for a predictable period as a basis for greater economic growth and inclusive productivity growth? And take it this way, the basic goal for the average economist is stability. But stability is not an end in itself. It's only a prerequisite for economic growth, economic transformation, and inclusive productivity growth. We cannot pursue macroeconomic stability as an end in itself. We need to guarantee like basic. And when we talk about enabling environment, we have to cost it. We have to be clear, what is it that constitutes enabling environment? What is it that makes it comfortable for Ghana's private sector to do well? Because that is where growth is going to come from. Okay? And if you look at Ghana's tax handles and you compare that across the African continent, you realize that we are undermining private sector competitiveness. We can host the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat. It doesn't mean we will host the games. This is not host and win. You can host and lose. Okay? And our ability is just about preparing our players to go to the tournament. We are only hosting the tournament. All that Ghana has to do now is to prepare the players. Who are the players? It's the private sector. It's the businesses. So if we can't sit down with them at the table, what are their concerns? What do you need? And how can we facilitate that? Then we should know that before the halftime, the deficit will be huge. I will end here, and then maybe in the course of the panel discussion, we will look at it. So certainly, we expect recovery. But my conclusion is that the recovery is going to be slow, and it's going to be painful. But more importantly, how do we make it job-rich? And how do we make it inclusive? And how do we make it sustainable? I think that is where the conversation should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think let's clap for him again. He's done a great job. Great perspective shared. At this point, we'll be calling on Yao Apialate, our partner for financial advisory, to come and share perspective or a presentation on the Deloitte Media Budget Expectation Survey. So Yao, if you are here, over to you.
So thank you. After such a powerful presentation from Prof, let me put a caveat before I start my Prof presentation is his presentation. This is not my research. It is Deloitte survey. So, our political actors, and Prof is so bold. You're on government payroll, and then you get alert this month. So we continue. This is a survey we gathered from yourselves. So you will see that we try to solicit views from the public. And we got about 239 responses from 6 different industries. A lot of the respondents were from the middle class or middle level management, so low to middle. Supervisors, executives, operation managers, branch managers. So these are the people who responded. Then the top level were few, but significant number, or the majority, were from the financial services. That tells you something. I think we will discuss it in detail. So you see the highest responses came from financial services industry. Why? Because they are concerned about the impact of the domestic restructuring and some of the government policies on their business. The financial services are very much concerned about that. And then that's followed by the consumer industry. Prof spoke about import and export, particularly imports. They are very much concerned about some of the key issues. And I think our survey report or findings aligns very much with what the EIU report recently published. They highlighted 4 key things that industry watchers are worried about. The first one that has got the highest impact to say is inflation and depreciation pressures. Inflation and depreciation pressures. The second is government revenue authority chasing them to pay taxes. That's EIU report. The third is impact of increasing taxes in the upcoming budget. That's something that they thought was high risk and high impact. And then the last is political activity, which obviously is related to next year's election. So our report aligns with what EIU findings came to. So you go to the next slide. So economic growth, the question we ask is, what are your predictions for Ghana's GDP in 2023? Ghana's GDP growth rate will exceed the IMF forecast of 1. Would Ghana's GDP growth exceed that? 34% are in agreement. So if you are an exam, 34%, is it a pass? At the same time, so about 33% either disagree nor agree. I mean, they are somewhere in the middle. So the neutral to strongly disagree is very strong to say. So there are only few, about 30%, that agree that you exceed that. So that's a concern. And that is born out of some of the factors that have been discussed by Prof and what we are seeing around. But 6% strongly agree. So you will probably find out where these 6% guys are sitting. So we continue. Which sectors do you anticipate will be the drivers of economic growth? And we've heard in the presentation here that countries that have weaned themselves off the IMF program have not gone back to the IMF, have driven their business or their countries with industry growth. So let's ask ourselves that which sector do we think is going to drive the growth going forward? 69%. So these are not, this is not like the pie chart that you have. So it's response that allowed you to do multiple responses. So 69%, that's a strongly think the service sector will drive the growth. So we are still driven by the service sector. But as Prof said, the employment generation and, let's say, growth in the economy are driven by the agri and industry sectors. But we still think the service sector, this will be followed by the extractive industry. You saw our colleagues or our friends and family members in the mining pits. This is what people, I mean, this is the sector that people think. But I think there's some good news there. The good news is that our Jubilee partners have been able to bring our daily production to 100,000 barrels a day. It used to be below that. And I know that other people who are operating at higher level at about 1.2 billion barrels a day. So we've sustained that a little bit. So the extractive industry is supposed to help us. And this will also, you will also have the next sector being the agri sector. The agri sector is supposed to drive it. And I think that's what all driven by government policies in the agri sector. So you go to the next slide. What do you foresee to be the impediment to growth in the industry sector? So, Prof, we are answering your question here. Why is the industry sector not growing? And so for majority of respondents, they think that one, global economic downturn is a key driver. So when there's little demand in advanced economies, who are you producing and who is going to buy? So when the demand is not there, it drives your production. The second reason or factor is currency fluctuation. And I tell you, we have manufacturing companies here, but they import some of the raw materials to manufacture. And so if currency issues are kind of a problem, then it affects their cost of production. So that's a key factor. And then the next factor there is the lack of infrastructure. Movement, restriction in infrastructure, restriction in movement. It's a key factor that affects it. And then the last that I will discuss is inflation. So as the cost of production increases, it's very difficult for industrial and manufacturing sector to thrive. And so these are the things that we should be worried about. What do you foresee? Okay, so we addressed that. So 68% identified inflation and currency fluctuation to be the number one impediment. So inflation and currency fluctuation is a key driver. So we should address these two, and industry will get back online. So let's go back. Let's continue. Ghana digitization agenda, and I think this is something that has been driven strongly by the government and obviously led by the Vice President. Has government technology and digitalization drive, such as online tax filing, payments, portal, e-VAT invoicing, automation of government services, etc., been useful to the industry? 73% of respondents agreed with government digitization drive has been useful to businesses. So I think that's a very good thing. So Honorable Minister, please take this to the government and obviously to the Vice President, that 73% of industry players really think that it's been good. And that's a very good response to have, but 23% still think it's neutral, and then 4% do not agree. You have to find who the 4% are. So we continue. In your view, how can the government further improve on its digitalization agenda? And I think it's something, this is a very good question to ask. So we should not really be too excited about what we've achieved. We should also be thinking about doing more. So 68% expect government to have more consultations and collaboration in developing and implementing digital initiatives. So we should understand who are those who really need it the most. So sometimes when we are implementing some of the digitalization policy or agenda, I remember some time ago there was a policy, maybe somewhere in an African country, that said that we are going to install prepaid meters on water. Someone says the water has not flowed for about 3 years. So if you install the prepaid, how do you even meter it? How do you even assess it? Because the water doesn't flow. So which of the sectors really need this agenda the most? So when you address that, so 68% expect some consultation. Then it's followed by about 51% expecting what? Introducing and implementing more online services. So where people can sit at their homes, pay their bills and others. You've seen that implemented by one of the utilities companies and is doing so well. So ECG, for instance, as we speak, does not take cash anywhere. That is a very good policy because you can always track it. You can always track it. So that's a very good policy. So we continue. Go to the next slide, please. 2023 mid-year budget expectation. So what are people expecting? So the Honorable Minister is here. I hope what you have as a draft is reflecting some of these. How positive are you about upcoming mid-year budgets, introducing policies that will help your industry to grow or industry's growth? Most respondents are pessimistic about the introduction of policies that will drive industry growth. They don't think any of the policies will address the growth in the industry. So you can see not at all positive, 13%, another 13%. So this allows you multiple responses, so you not get the 100% in total. Then somewhat positive, so some people are not sure. So you can see that there's some pessimistic view or attitude to this question that we pose to a lot of players. And I guess it's because historically, some of the policies that has come, we have not had or gone through a detailed consultation, or it has not helped some industries. So that's what they are worried about. But you can go to the next slide. What, according to you, can the budget offer to facilitate ESG adoption? And I think we saw that in the previous presentation, that we have to grow the economy sustainably. So we should not only be interested in growing the numbers, but how sustainably are we growing the economy? So tax and green financing incentives will propel Ghana towards carbon neutral commitment. And I think for me, what I've seen in other developed countries is the incentive that we offer to businesses when they go green. If there's no incentive, why should they go green? So if, let's say for the next 5 years, all government vehicles are supposed to be electric vehicles in the next 5 years. And if you're a private sector and you decide to participate in that, you get a certain portion of tax concession. That would be good. So when we have policies that are driving tax and going green, it will help drive that. So you can see 73% offering tax incentives as substitute to promote green economy is something that the expectation. So I guess, Honorable Minister, we take note of that as we develop our green policy. So we continue. Catalyst for economic growth. What budgetary steps can act as drivers for your sector's growth? Sector growth will be boosted by lowering the VAT and increasing private sector participation. So the reduction in VAT, it's like the common theme. They would like to have the VAT reduced. So 66%, as you can see there, will have a revision of the VAT rate to reduce prices. So it's not only affect the business concerned, but even for us as consumer. So the more you buy, the more taxes that you pay. So some of these indirect taxes, the more you buy, the more taxes you pay. Then incentivizing private sector participation. So whatever you want the private sector to do or to participate more in, like I said, for the green vehicles or green programs, we incentivize them. So those incentives are there and they will participate the more. So you go to the next slide. Catalyst for industry growth. What measures by the government can boost your industry exports? So for us to take advantage of after, what are some of the things that government can do for us to take advantage of that? Credit availability and reduced custom fees will increase industry exports. So the more we export, the more we address issues like unemployment and then currency issues. So the industry watchers are saying we should have credit availability. The cost of financing is so high that it is not competitive to run, maybe to operate your business in Ghana relative to Ivory Coast or some other country. So if the cost of financing is low relative to what we see in other countries, it will help. And also reduce custom fees. I mean, the cost of clearing your goods and then all the taxes connected to that. It's also very high in effect. Then lastly, reducing the corporate income tax rate. So the corporate income tax rate in other countries has been reduced to allow for production. So we reduce the corporate income tax rate and then there will be production and generation of employment. So we go. Desired direct tax changes. What could be some of the most effective changes in direct tax regulation for your industry? Most respondents viewed reduction in corporate income tax rate as the most desired. So our 25% and some industry 22 and others, they want it reviewed. So if you can take a look at it, at that and see the impact overall. So reducing corporate income tax rate, 74%. Then almost aligned, are these two, reviewing capital allowance deduction for certain vehicles upwards. Okay, so this salon cars. And then aligning treatment of unrealized exchange gains and unrealized foreign exchange losses. And I think this became a critical issue when we went through the period of exchange rate volatility. Like people were affected by the gain, others too were affected by the losses, and they were very significant. So we have to look at that as well. So how do industry watchers or industry players benefit from that? Next slide, please. Desired indirect tax changes. What could be some of the most effective changes in indirect tax regulation for your industry? Respondent expects scrapping of COVID-19 health levy and review to the VAT regime. So the COVID-19 health levy, do we still have COVID? And it's still there. So we introduce some of those policies, and then there's a period that they are supposed to, but then they still continue. We keep rolling them over. So we don't want to roll over again. COVID is over, so we don't see any COVID anywhere. But let's not do the Prof boxing thing. We take the COVID out and we bring it back in some way. Okay, so you continue, please. So I'll tell you a story before I end this. So the head teacher of a school one day said he would like to take photographs of the students. 500 students, he called the photographer and said, how much would you charge? The guy said he would charge 10. The headmaster said, no, there are too many, there are 500 of them, just charge 50. The photographer agreed. And then he said, class teacher, come. Tell your students that tomorrow they should come with 10 CDs. The head teacher told the teacher that 10 CDs. The teacher went to class, peoples, tomorrow come with 15 CDs for the photographs. Then the children went to school. Mommy, they said we should bring 30 CDs. Okay, when your dad comes, I'll tell him. Then someone said, hey, daddy is dead. As soon as daddy comes, they said they are collecting 50 CDs. We can change the world and make it a better place. It is in our hands. So we can contribute and change the world. It's in our hands. It is not only in the hands of government. It starts from you. And we can make the change. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Yao. That was very insightful. I think it's a good gauge of what people expect for the mid-year, and I'm sure our Honorable Minister is taking notes. At this point, we need to have the Honorable Minister here, but before that, let me acknowledge the presence of Seth Chum Akwabwa, who is the CEO of Ghana Association of Industries, and also acknowledge the presence of Bernard Able, a seasoned journalist and media personality. Bernard will be taking over after the keynote address by the minister, and Bernard will lead the panel discussions. And so let's invite, with your permission, Chairman, the Honorable Minister, Abna Osei Asare.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Prof. Where should I begin from? Anyway, thanks. I mean, that was a well-prepared presentation, and we'll work with it. But one thing that I think would have made it more objective was to situate it in the context of the financial sector recovery that we went through, the COVID-19 pandemic, and then finally the effects of that, because it was not just about the grains, it was about the oil, and that also sparked the depreciation that we saw in the second quarter of 2022. But thank you for that presentation. And then for Mr. Latte, that feedback, we will take it. And at the right time, we reflect. You remember, it's not just the mid-year that we have to prepare to Parliament. We also have the main budget, which is supposed to come off in November, latest by November 17th. So if some do not feature in this mid-year budget, which is going to be read on Tuesday, we are hoping that in November, we will see some reflection of the thoughts that we have here and there. So on behalf of the Finance Minister, I would like to say a big thank you to Deloitte. It is an honor to present this morning, because we believe that at such forums, we get good feedback And then we are also able to share some of our policies across to you. So thank you very much for creating this opportunity for us to be here. But if you will recall, on 6th of December 2022, I mentioned that we were in for a truly eventful and rewarding 2023 when I participated in your post-budget event organized by yourself. This was just after the 2023 budget statement had been presented to Parliament amidst severe economic uncertainties and instabilities. And at that time, the theme for that program was strive for economic stability and growth through strategic investment and domestication. Yes, 2023 was a very difficult beginning. At that time, major external shocks had heightened pre-existing vulnerabilities and were significantly undermining our public finances across the world. And here in Ghana, it was worse. In December 2022, hello?
Hello?
It's not.
The battery
Is it working? Yes, working. In December 2022, we had seen inflation peaking to 54.1%. The CD in November 2022 also depreciated by some 54.2% against the dollar. And we had just launched the difficult but necessary domestic debt exchange that Prof spoke about. That was on the 5th of December, and we had a program on the 6th of December. We were also faced with a sharply reducing external buffers. And at that time, we also engaged in the IMF program to support our post-COVID-19 program for economic growth. In Prof's submission, he said maybe we haven't said that enough. We haven't shared that program enough with all our stakeholders. And I believe that this forum will create that opportunity for us to share with some of our stakeholders and also take feedback from you on how we can make it better. And so, turning around the story 7 months down the line, the story is quite different. And it's different because we have all worked together to make this happen. As we speak, we have completed the initial part of the domestic debt exchange program with a subscription rate of 85%. We have also secured the $3 billion extended credit facility from the IMF and received the first tranche of the $600 million US. And this was done 3 days after the confirmation. We've also sustained investments in key sectors of the economy, including education. Our free SHS is still running. In the health sector, the Agenda 111 project is still ongoing. And also, we have safeguarded social protection programs because we know that with the onset of the COVID and the Russian-Ukraine war, it pushed quite a number of people into the poverty bracket. And so, government is making sure that it protects the poor and the vulnerable. Again, we have also rolled out the front-loaded fiscal adjustments as our revenue and expenditure as proposed in the 2023 budget report. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing the impacts of these key operations on our macroeconomic fronts. And now inflation has come down to 42.5. That was the last June ratings that we were given. Moving from 54 to 42 in 6 months, for any nation is significant. And this tells you that the PCPEC program that government has put in place is yielding some fruits. Also, by the end of June, we have seen a relatively stable exchange rate depreciation compared to November 2022, where we had the cedi depreciating against the dollar by 54%. Now it's moving around 22%, and we're hoping to do more from the feedback we got from Deloitte with your engagements with the other, with industry players. That is one thing we also need to look at. And also, we can see that interest rates have all significantly come down compared to December 2022. We've also seen some economic growth rates. In the first quarter, we saw growth rates inching to 4.2% from 3.1% in December 2022. So clearly, we have seen some form of stability that we cannot pretend is not there. On the 15th of June 2023, the IMF actually stated that against a complex global economic backdrop, the Ghanaian economy is showing signs of stabilization with softening inflation and an increase in international reserves and less volatile exchange rate. So on behalf of the Minister for Finance and the entire ministry, I would like to express our appreciation to all of you here who have sacrificed towards stabilizing the economy. Thank you for sharing in the burden of rebuilding our country. And how do we sustain this recovery that we have made? The emerging question remains how we deepen and sustain this stability and promote growth to create the jobs that we are all looking and craving for our people. And so this is why Deloitte is right to host this event under the theme, Positioning for Sustainable Recovery, Ghana's Economic Outlook Post-IMF Deal. Let me assure this gathering that these are the questions and the issues that have preoccupied our attention to as a government. And we have made clear that the fact that the IMF ECF program is not the solution to our problems. We have made that very clear, that that is not the solution to our problems. And we all know that. We are intent on implementing the raft of policy measures that were approved by Parliament in the 2023 budget statement to reset the economy. But despite the relative stability that we have achieved, we are mindful of the lingering risks that we have. Towards a sustainable recovery of the economy, government is pressing on with the remaining components of what is painful but necessary, and that is the other part of the domestic debt exchange. We announced that on the 14th of July to do with the cocoa bills of 7.9 billion Ghana cedis and the dollar-denominated bonds of about $800 million. I want to reiterate that government's position to these measures are to secure sustainable debt levels and move economic growth forward. It's a painful path we have taken, but the alternative is simply unthinkable. And so we hope and pray that you support us achieve this. Let's ask ourselves, how do we entrench this stability and promote growth? Based on the immediate impact of the interventions of the last 7 months, government continues to reassess the tools and options for economic growth and revitalization. As a step forward, we intend to use the opportunity of the mid-year review to drive stability and growth. The focus will be on revenue enhancement through both administrative and compliance measures. We'll also use fiscal consolidation and structural measures that are outlined in our post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, the PCPEG, which is supported by the IMF. In the mid-year, we should expect that we will provide updates on the implementation of the 2023 budget so far. We'll also focus on structural reforms to address structural weaknesses and build resilience in key areas, such as expenditure commitments that Prof mentioned today. We'll also look at arrears clearance. We'll look at our debt management, financial stability, and the review of our statutory funds. And one of the most important things that we also want to use the mid-year to address is the issues in the energy sector as well as the cocoa sector. We also want to use this mid-year to rejuvenate the growth agenda towards a more prioritized growth strategy. The strategy will concentrate efforts to accelerate growth by attracting significant new investments in areas such as the agri sector, local manufacturing, tourism, and digital transformation. And so, Prof, we've heard you. And even if we have jumped from agri to the services industry, I believe with the programs in the PCPEG, it will help us get back on track to see that real growth that will produce or generate employment and real income for our citizens. One thing that we are also not leaving behind, and we're going to use the mid-year budget to promote, is to safeguard social protection for the vulnerable. Because like you mentioned in the data that you have, a lot of people have been put in that poor and vulnerable bracket as a result of events that have gone on. And so we need to address this as a nation. The government is aware that these interventions will be critical to the future of our country and people. Yet we will still require the partnership of everyone. These partnerships will be even more critical as we seek, one, to engage the external creditors after we conclude the remaining components of the domestic debt restructuring. Also to implement a growth strategy to complement the PCPEG, and also to protect the financial sector by establishing the Ghana Financial Stability Fund. One other thing that will also be critical, that will need your support, is how we work towards concluding and passing the first review of the IMF program in September. And we believe that this will unlock the disbursement of the second tranche of $600 million in November 2023. And also, we will need your support to prepare the 2024 budget statement to entrench the stability that we have seen now and advance growth for transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, the success of these operations will combine to make 2023 the bounce back year. I believe so. The success will speak to our history as a resilient people with an uncommon determination. This is one of those critical years that we collectively must tackle the challenges that previously inhibited our progress. If Malaysia and Singapore have been able to do it, I believe that collectively and together, we also will be able to do it. So let me state it again that we are truly in for an eventful and rewarding year in 2023. But personally, I'm confident that we will succeed. We have a plan, and the plan is in the PCPEG. We need to share it more with our stakeholders and also take feedback from them and make sure the plan is robust enough. And together, let's hold our hands and make sure we achieve this together. We have key partners as you. We have the discipline, and above all, we have God, so we know we can succeed. I believe that before COVID-19, we saw economic growth rebound to an average of 7%. Our inflation moved from a double digit to a single digit, and the average rate of depreciation of the cedi against the dollar and other major currencies was around below 10%. And all this happened between 2017 and 2019, when we were under an IMF program. And so at that time, if we were able to do it, nothing stops us from doing it again. All we have to do is to hold our hands together and make sure we all take the feedback that comes from within and make sure we incorporate it and make things happen. And so, Deloitte, thank you so much for the feedback you have provided to us. We'll make sure we work with them. And I believe that whatever engagements we are going to have in the panel discussions too, we will take feedback and make sure we make the economy robust and sound. But we cannot do it on our own. So we need your support. Government will need your support in everything that it's doing currently. You mentioned the taxes And you all know that before you can do anything, you have to look within. And so we will have to raise the revenues that we need. But one thing Prof also added was that it should be efficient. So we should find efficient ways, and that is where the digitalization comes in. We're going to use all that and your support to make things happen. And so thank you very much for this opportunity, and I will sit for any questions that will come to me. On this note, I say God bless our nation and make our nation great and strong. Thank you.
So that was the Deputy Minister for Finance. I think it was nice. Can you put your hands together for her one more time? This is a very busy period for the Ministry of Finance, so we really appreciate the fact that she took the time to come. They have a budget event on Tuesday. I've been at events this week where people have been invited from various ministries and they've not been able to show up because of the pressing times we are in. So, Honorable Abena, we appreciate you for your time. I'm going to call the panel. We have a lot of viewers online. In fact, we have almost 400 people watching us online, and I want us to give a shout to the online people. Can you do it? You know, we are in the air condition, we are eating the food. We should shout to, we won't shout for the people. It's not fair. You know, so what I'll do is that I may start with their questions. They have lots of questions for us. They are watching us on YouTube. Some of them are on Zoom, and they are enjoying the program very, very much. We want to thank Deloitte for the way they've put this together. I enjoyed the presentations. I missed the chairman's remarks, but I enjoyed Bokpin. A very interesting thing I want to say. So when I was in Legon, Bokpin and Abena were my seniors. And what is interesting is that Bokpin was studying finance, and Abena was studying economics. Now she's in the Ministry of Finance, and he's now an economist. You know, so I don't know how that happened. And even though I also studied economics, I'm here. Obviously, I wasn't that serious. So Bokpin moved from finance and he's enjoying the economics. Abena chatted after Legon accounting, and now she's doing finance, and we are very happy about what she's doing. But it's a very difficult time. And sometimes it's when you finish that you will know how much work you did, you know, because everybody is under pressure. And so it's not easy at all. And Bokpin, thank you for being consistent. You are hard-hitting, very powerful. So it's good like that. So what I wanted to do was, before the panel, Abena, I wanted you to elaborate a bit on something, because there's only one question I have for you. Is this mid-year budget going to change anything? I'm asking this because there's already an IMF program. There are stringent prior conditions. You did the first review happened in June, you passed. So there's already a plan, okay? And there's a big budget coming in November for 2024. So I would have even said we shouldn't even do mid-year budget. But it's part of the system. You hinted that cocoa something, growth something, social protection something. I want you to give more meat to the social protection part. Because yesterday I was at a World Bank event here, and they said that 850,000 people had been pushed into poverty because of inflation. And they even spoke about the fact that the tariff adjustments we did, the lowering of the adjustment, had affected poor people more. Okay, so just give us a hint. We the poor people know. What are you doing for us? You see, are you going to reduce some? ECG is collecting money. The port is everybody is collecting. So give us a hint of any of the social protection things. You don't have to be detailed, but give us a hint of what we should expect on Tuesday. Just a hint. I won't report it in the news. It will just be between the two of us. Yes. So while she's thinking about that, I want to call the panel to come up. Professor Bokpin, put your hands together for him. He's coming back up the stage. Are you still the Dean of Students? No. You've lost that position. The way you talk, why will you? They won't keep you in that position. I'm even surprised they still pay you. George Ankoma is our tax partner at Deloitte. Let's put our hands up for George. Thank you, George. It's always good to see you. We're also privileged to have from the AGI, Adobia Esiama Boaji. She's from the AGI. And we are happy that the AGI Chief Executive is also here. It tells you how important they take this program. It's rare to see the two of them at the same event. So, Idobia, thank you for coming. And then, of course, last but not least, Yao Apialate, who's the partner for financial advisory. Did you deliberately skew the survey so that more financial people will answer the survey? Because it was you who did the survey or what? Wonderful. So, Honorable Deputy Minister, can you give us a hint? Would there be some major announcement on the social protection side? Is LEAP going up? School feeding? Are you extending free SHS? National health insurance? Are you lowering tariffs? What? Just, people want to know. So if you can't tell us to, we won't force you, but you open the floor for us. Please put a mic on.
Hello? Yeah, it's on.
Yes.
And thank you, Bernard. Like I mentioned earlier, that is going to be about the growth agenda, and the growth agenda is all spelled out in the COVID-19 PCPEG.
Okay.
And as part of that, we are to aggressively mobilize domestic revenue. We are also supposed to streamline expenditure. We are also supposed to boost local production, promote and diversify our exports, and implement reforms in the public sector. But one of the most important things that we also are supposed to do is to encourage inclusive growth and support the poor and the vulnerable. And as part of supporting the poor and the vulnerable, we have measures in place to make sure that certain programs that are targeted towards the poor are protected.
Okay.
And it's clearly sealed out in the IMF program that we have. In the IMF program, we are expected to spend a certain portion of the budget consistently. Before we pass any review, we should have spent a certain portion of the budget on some selected social intervention programs that addresses the needs of the poor and the vulnerable. One of such programs is to make sure that NHI, is well catered for, and they are able to pay their service providers. Another is to make sure that we address the issue with school feeding and make sure the kids are fed as they are supposed to. Another important thing is the capitation grants under the school program. And that one too, we are expected to make some expenditure towards that. It's not negotiable. And then the last one has to do with LEAP. And for LEAP, there is a program to increase the number of beneficiaries on LEAP. And we are hoping that by the end of the year 2023, we would have increased the number of beneficiaries on LEAP, because to address some of these challenges that has befallen us, we need to look at the poor and the vulnerable. You also mentioned that with the tariff adjustments, and some people have been pushed down below. And that is also being looked at, and to make sure that those who for one reason or the other are on the lifeline continue to remain on the lifeline, even though tariffs are going up. So these are some of the things that government is doing and has protected, and is in the PCPEG and the IMF program to make sure we protect the poor and the vulnerable.
Thank you, Abuna. A bonus question before I come to the panel, so you can sit. This question is, usually when I talk to people in the education sector, in the health sector, I get the impression that the capping of some of the statutory funds affects them. I interviewed the NHIS boss, and he agrees with the capping because Parliament passed it, but some people think that the cap should be reviewed. I think Get Fund have the same feeling. Even the, the Jews Assembly Common Fund. That discussion come up at all as we prepared for this budget? And should we expect a review of the cap percentages?
Okay. Let me just clarify things here. With the statutory funds, we have the Jews Assembly Common Fund, we have the Get Fund, we have the NHIL, the Energy Fund, and a couple of others. And in this IMF program, we are seeking to review all the statutory funds and look to see whether some still remain relevant to our cause today, and what we can do to improve on the statutory funds. DACF is one of those statutory funds, and DACF by law is not capped. So DACF funds is up to 5% of the total revenue that it generates in a particular year, and that is set aside and given to DACF. For National Health Insurance Fund and then the GET Fund, yes, they are capped. But Bernard, the capping, let me explain, is just to pool resources together. In the last budget, that's the 2023 budget, through the capping, we were able to pool resources of about 12 billion Ghana cedis. And this we redistributed along the lines of government income, like compensation, capital expenditure, and the other things. So it is not like government taking the money away and just putting it somewhere, but rather taking it and redistributing it such that other components in the government budget are well resourced. And most of the time, when government caps and there's a need to reinstate the capping, we do that. Way back in 2017, when we realized that NHIS, yes, had an arrears of about 2 billion. When government capped, government reinstated that money to enable NHIS clear the arrears. There are many times we cap and then we reinstate. But the capping is to bring it into the wider pool to redistribute for other equally important programs in the government line. So the capping doesn't go anywhere. It just fits into government financing of its budget. But yes, anytime we need to assist the statutory funds to clear certain debts or address certain issues, we are able to do that. A typical example is the Dachi PLC fund and the GET fund. Clearly, it is part of the debt restructuring which government has taken upon itself. So as and when it's necessary, any statutory funds that needs that support, we will continue to support them. But the capping is to bring everything into the pool and make sure we redistribute for everyone. And so we mentioned in the budget that we are going to reinstate NHI with about 50 million extra to help them. And so as and when we need to help, we come in and support. But the DACF is not capped.
Thank you for that clarification. There's a question from Annette Enchubuesiako. She's in the cloud. Thank you. And it's a very interesting question. She says, what is meant by freeing fiscal space? And how can we become more responsible so the monetary and fiscal policy can work together? Annette Enchubuesiako. It's almost like a two-in-one. Maybe let me break it down. I sense in the question she's saying that the fiscal and the monetary are not working in tandem, which I think Bokwin alluded to. Fiscal, for again, those of you who may not be familiar with this, so the monetary policy is really inflation targeting. We are raising the rates. Inflation came down until 2 months ago, started inching up a bit. There's a strong feeling that our inflation has supply side issues, a lot of it imported. So even though the governor is raising the rates, it's not having the effect on inflation as we want because the fiscal side is not responsive. So I think it's a two-in-one question. When you say you are freeing up the fiscal space, it suggests that you are looking for more money to do good things. But the problem we as consumers face is that inflation eats away our income. And the reason the BOG is not able to fight it is that the supply side issues don't move when the demand side issues are moving. So just your general thoughts around inflation management, the fact that it was coming down until May, it inched up slightly, how disappointing that was, and the commitment between the fiscal side that you are at and the monetary side to work together to make sure inflation is actually tamed. So I've sort of added to her question. I don't know if I should let you answer it now or just think about it and let me do the panel. I hope you are leaving, so I should throw all my bombs. Okay, then please answer it before you go. Okay.
Thank you. By 11, I have to be in Parliament, so
okay.
It's fine. Yes, Bernard, we all know the fiscal is about your revenues and your expenditure.
Yeah.
So you either increase your revenues or you cut down on your expenditure. And if you agree with me, in the 2023 budget, government said it was cutting down its flagship programs. And with that alone, we're able to make some savings of about a billion. So we have freed that fiscal space. Again, in the 2023 budget, we went to Parliament with about 5 revenue measures, which got passed late, but we are grateful to Parliament for at least passing those revenue measures. And this will also bring in some revenues to us, and that will also increase the fiscal space. And we heard Prof talking about the fact that we have moved away from agric, missed the middle
industry
part, which is the industry, and then gone to services. But the most important thing in addressing our inflationary pressures and the currency fluctuation are policies that we believe will be found in the industry sector. And that is the Planting for Food and Jobs policy that we have, the 1D, 1F that we have. The 1D, 1F currently has about 296 factories in various stages of implementation. And this alone has created about 160,000 direct and indirect jobs. And so we believe that if we should focus on this, it will go a long way to help us reduce our imports and address the monetary policy issues that we are facing. Again, with the Planting for Food and Jobs, that will also feed into the industry, and that will also help bring down the food inflation that is so high that we see every time the inflation is broken down into for us to see. So these are some of the things that I believe we are doing. And let me also mention that there's going to be a second part of the Planting for Food and Jobs, and this time is going to be more targeted at farmers to make sure we get the best out of them and also increase our production of food. And when we combine these policies with what has been put on the table already, I believe that we will address both the fiscal situation and the monetary situation. But this is not something that is going to go away in the next 2-3 months. This is something that is medium to long term. But I believe that if we come together and we are resolute and make sure we put things together, we can get there. And then it will not just be something that is not sustainable, but it's going to be sustainable because it's going to be part and parcel of the whole transformation agenda that we have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Abuna,
on this note, I would like to beg leave of you because I have to go to Parliament.
Wonderful. You spent a lot of time with us. We appreciate it. Put your hands together for the Deputy Minister for Finance, MP for Etiwa East, Honorable Abuna Osei-Asare. And we have a link, so be watching it on Zoom. Okay, so that you can tell Ken that we are still talking. It's very important. I was actually watching the presentation online as I was coming, so we have a very nice link, and we hope that the minister and co can be watching. I want to welcome my panel again. It's good to see all of you. I suspect the panel's balance is very good because AGI, you are in the middle of a lot of things, all right, and so you are being pulled in all directions. Our George, you are here because tax is the big topic. We are not happy with the taxes at all, so you will want to do some tax things. You, because of the survey and also financial sector, interesting point about how the financial sector are the least optimistic because of the DDEP in the chart you showed. It's very important because the financial sector is like the catalyst, and if they are not happy, it means they don't lend, and if we are not lending, it means we won't get money to do anything. So I will get your comment on that. And then Bokpin as well. I remember prior to the IMF program, I was at a program with you where you said, to recover Ghana, we need 3 legs. Debt treatment, then there's also structural adjustment, and there was a third point I don't remember. Fiscal. It seems as if we are hearing a lot about the debt. It started. We are hearing a lot about the fiscal, but the structural has gone quiet. So maybe I'll start with you just by asking, when you look through the IMF program in the long-term plan, do you see any commitment to a structural adjustment? Because the debt they are doing, the fiscal, she said a lot about it. Where are you seeing the structural?
Yeah, so there are some structural reforms in the program. If you put all of that together, it doesn't give us that anchor for sustainability. And this is where I see the difficulty of the IMF. Some of the things we are asking our government to do, it will not come from the IMF. Their legal framework will not allow them. So, and also, of course, the governance reforms is also very, very important. So you see that we have chosen the low-hanging fruits. So when it came to even fiscal, the level of fiscal adjustment we expect from the program is not what is in the program. So you see that they are cutting down on capex. They are hoping to make a fiscal savings of 0.9%. Then they are limiting hiring and wages. I think they are making savings of about 0.5%. Then there is also capping, transfers through capping. They are hoping to save about 3%. That's what is in the program. So there's capping in the program. Okay, so these are and then goods and services. But actually, if you look at the effect of this expenditure cut, it will affect growth. Okay, so the kind of job-rich growth we are expecting and the kind of expenditure cut and the reforms here, they are not adequate, they are not sufficient to actually guarantee that kind of growth that will be sustainable. And you will see it through IMF programs, and that is why anytime we are able to get some macroeconomic stability whilst we are under the program. But once we exit, it's very difficult.
Okay. George, you are the tax man on the panel. I remember in the first quarter or so, they passed about 4 new tax laws. So there was the excise tax thing, there was the Ghana Growth and Sustainability something, and then there was a third tax. I don't remember the name for now. My question is a very generic question. Do fiscal objectives, like raising more money, do they have to come at the expense of growth in terms of job creation? Because what I heard from the industry report was that we are going to sack people because we're not going to make any money. So all the taxes you are taxing us, you are taxing pre-tax profit. I mean, what's the sense? What does that even mean? All right. So my question is that, can you have taxes being raised from industry and still not negatively impact job creation and growth? Because the two seem to always be in tension when the tax. So this is my general question for you.
Okay, thanks, Bernard. Taxation, definitely, every country or every nation is taxation. However, in taxing, you need to ensure that it is said that it does not injure industry or the businesses that you are actually taxing from. There's a saying that you don't kill the hen that lays the golden egg. And so if you are taxing businesses, taxing, and at the end of the day, the policies that we have are not enhancing the business growth, it becomes very difficult for businesses to grow. And I think there are a few taxes that has been talked about. I think the survey even came out with some of them being injurious to businesses. For instance, the levies that were passed a few years back, including the COVID-19 levy that was passed, these levies have become cost on the income statement of businesses. And that alone, 6% is a lot, because unlike the VAT system, for instance, where it's in and out system, the levies are cost sitting on the businesses. And so if a business is not making that money, and there are sectors that really are suffering when it comes to the levies, because if you look at the margins they make, and the levies, the cost of the levies, it's quite significant, and it's very difficult for them to survive. One of the taxes that was also passed recently is the minimum tax regime that was passed for businesses that are even making losses. Business is making loss, and still they are to pay tax by taking 5% of their income and subject that as their taxable income. And 5% of your revenue being taxed can be very significant, because your bottom line, you are making a loss, but you still need to pay that tax. That is quite injurious to businesses, and it becomes very difficult for businesses to really survive in such circumstances. We also know of the financial sector, which has suffered so much with the debt restructuring. The financial sector is the worst hit, and at the same time, they are the very institutions that are paying financial sector recovery levy and also paying growth and sustainability levy, which if you put together, means that they are paying about 35% or even more cumulatively in terms of taxes. So when a business is suffering and not making money and they still have significant taxes to be paid, then you definitely would have a situation where the business either will have to downsize to be able to survive. And I think that is a very significant issue that businesses really, and you see that from the survey. I believe industry have raised this as well in various fora, and I think that's something that.
So if I hear you correctly, George, the government wants the revenue now, so it will sacrifice growth of industry to get the money now. Whereas what probably should be done is to allow the companies to grow, raise more revenue, then you can tax it.
Exactly.
So they are almost putting the cart before the horse.
That is the issue, and that is what is making industry suffer, because we always talk of widening the tax net. Widening the tax net, for instance, does not necessarily mean taxing the same people more or increasing tax rates. It's about ensuring that the tax system is fair, ensuring that more people are brought to the tax net to be able to get little from everyone than just be taxing the few who are actually. I'll give you specific examples as well. If you look at when the intent of introducing the e-levy, for instance, okay, it was to bring on board the informal sector that we were not able to get so much taxes from, because this country is driven largely by the informal sector as well. Mm-hmm. However, you see that this is the sector that the formal sector rather ends up, and then you and I, who are already very much compliant when it comes to taxes, are rather the ones paying more taxes. Our income tax rates have even been raised to 35% now, depending on your income level and all that. So critically, you see that the very people or the very sectors that are contributing are being hit the more. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is the need for a bit more reform to ensure that we bring on board the informal sector, because this country, like I said, is driven largely by the sector. And so if we can get a little from them, I think that will significantly help with the revenue that we are looking for in terms of taxes, and not overburden the already suffering sectors that I've mentioned.
I'll come back to you later on some of the tax things they are doing. I recall there was a time in October last year, they went into Ashanti region, they went into KJTIA, and they were sitting in the big shops, and they were basically saying, we are counting like you are counting, right? Now, what I'm told is that anecdotally, they did raise their revenues, yet there was a certain political backlash, and then they sort of backed off, all right? But I will let you rest. Let me come to Edubia from AGI. I just want to know, how bad is it when we say that these taxes are crippling industry? Because I interviewed Seth some time ago. I was talking about how some of your big manufacturers are struggling with some of the taxes. I don't know whether that was the excise tax or one of them. There was this company in Tema that was complaining a lot. So just give us a sense of how serious is the effect of these taxes being announced recently. I think the last round, there was the excise tax amendment, growth and stabilization levy. There was also an income tax amendment. How bad are those taxes for industry?
Bernard, I might say it's suffocating. It's terrible. And industries are going. I guess the VAT part has been taken, the straight levy, because that 6% adds up to our cost of doing business. And of course, it gets transferred to the consumer. Then we have the VAT, which is recoverable. We are saying that couple them, merge them, so that we can recover. If you want to keep it at the 21%, do so. But technically, because there is tax on tax, it's not 21%, it's 21.9%. As businesses, because we import, although we are in industry, you know that Ghana, our import is way higher than our export. I think the ratio is 2:1 of import to export. At the port, the taxes we pay end up being much higher with some hidden costs in there because of the way the VAT and NHIL and all those 6% are calculated. So we are saying that make life easy for us. And of course, with what we have seen this morning, recovery would be based on the industry, the productive sector. And we cannot do it without the support of government. Now, the reason why I'm saying it's suffocating is that we have companies downsizing because they need to survive. And they are paying all these taxes. So the only option is that they have to downsize. As I speak with you, we have one of our companies in the beverage sector which closed down one of their production lines. 150 people have gone home.
In Ghana?
In Ghana.
One company?
One company.
Wow.
Just one of their production lines. 150 people have gone home.
Hey.
A couple of weeks after they went home, there was news that I think 2 or 3 people had passed on.
Oh.
The situation is bad. Now we look at exchange loss. I mean, I think Godfred made it in his presentation.
Yeah.
We are looking at the rice sector, for example.
Yeah.
You have companies that mill rice, and they buy paddy. Now they have bought paddy when the exchange rate was quite high. For some reason, the rate has dropped a bit, and so there is exchange loss. If they mill that rice, they are going to run into huge losses because the current market price of the paddy is even cheaper than what they bought. Here is the case where our exchange loss is disallowed in arriving at the chargeable income.
Wow.
And so we are saying that tax policy should look at it once again. Give businesses, industries some respite so that we can survive and move on. Now we are looking at the printing sector.
Yeah.
When we bring in books, initially printed books, they were tax-free, import duty VAT. Meanwhile, local printers are paying taxes for their raw materials. And so we make them uncompetitive. With time, VAT has been introduced on imports of printed books, but we are still saying that extend the import duties to them because it is really affecting, it is inhibiting progress in the printing sector. If not, then give the local printers the contract to supply textbooks. And so all put together, indeed, I must say that we are suffering not only from the taxes, but we are equally suffering from the environment, the business environment.
Yeah.
The IMF document claims that they are providing a conducive business environment. But what makes it conducive? You are paying high utilities. Water bill, for example, for my sector, went up by 225%. Others were paying over 300% for water. Electricity, inflation, interest. You can't even borrow.
Yeah.
You can't borrow. So, and we have become so risky as industry compared to the trading sector, commerce. And so when you go to the banks, because of your risk, they are more comfortable to do business with the traders than us who are in the productive sector. So I think that in all, we are just suffocating. And if care is not taken, the objective will be to shut down the industry sector. And I don't think that will augur well for Ghana. I wish that the Deputy Minister was here to hear some of these things. Now, apart from this, we are also looking at fees and charges from state-owned enterprises. If you go to the port, for example, just this year, in April, the GPHA gave notice that they want to increase their charges. 5% on dollar index charges and 95% on CD index charges. How do you want us to survive? A country that is doing 67% imports as against 33% exports, how do we survive? After negotiations, they are maintaining the 5% on the dollar and 65% on the CD. Bear in mind that because they are charging carriers, as in shipping lines, automatically this cost will be passed on.
To you guys.
Unfortunately, when it's being passed on, it doesn't pass on in its raw state. Something gets added to it, you know. And so at the end of the day, I don't know what 2024 holds for us, but I know that Mr. Akwabawa is here, Seth is here. He will tell you that most industries had to even cut down on their targets this year. The objective is just to survive because we can't predict. And once you cannot predict, you can't do business.
Wow, this is, Charlie, it's very depressing. Wow, I don't know about you. But thank you for your candor. My question for you, again, thank you for everything you've said. I'm confused because, you see, in a sense, when you guys produce more, it will reduce our import dependence. Then our vulnerability to all this dollar thing will go away. But a lot of your inputs are also imported. Do you understand me? So let's assume you are producing this shoe. Maybe you import the leather from Italy to do the shoe in Ghana. So the shoe will be expensive, not because your production process is not efficient, but because your input is expensive. All right. Yet on another hand, we are also saying that we can use tariffs and quotas to support you guys against the cheap imports. So for example, rice. We can say we are producing 60% of our rice here. We can use tariffs to make imported rice expensive so that Ghanaian rice will be cheaper for us to eat. So does the AGI have a proposal as to how government can use tax and tariff policy to achieve a dual objective of strengthening the local guys, raise your revenue, and block the importers? Is it possible to do it in one lifetime?
Well, it will still come back to government because when you come to tariffs, they will always make reference to WTO. It doesn't permit that, to create barriers with tariffs. And so, like we are saying, the quota system. But what we are experiencing currently is pre-production tax. AGI is saying, let's shift to post-production tax. As I'm bringing in my raw materials, give me a waiver on my raw materials. Let me go through my production. When I finish, at that time, I'm on the equal level with whoever is importing. Then you can tax me.
Okay.
Because you are forcing me to look for funds to finance production, which doesn't make life easy. Then we look at, I think on Tuesday, there was this meeting from the Ministry of Trade.
Yeah.
Trying to put together restriction
Quota.
on
Rice and chicken.
Rice, chicken, and fruit juice.
Rice, chicken, and fruit juice.
These are the three main they want to start with. So rice, for example, we know that we consume so much rice. When I was a child, we don't eat rice often. Christmas, maybe Easter, birthday. If not, it's the normal banku and bayre and bodie,
Today,
but times have changed.
Everybody.
It's rice.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we have local producers here.
Yeah.
And I believe that when we raise the issue of quality, it always comes with time. We perfect it, So we are saying that, okay, I think at the time, the figure given was $400 million of rice imports per annum. We've gone to IMF. How much have they given us so far? 600 million.
Yes.
Okay. So that is 2/3. Only rice. So rice will wipe out all this money in no time. So we are saying that, okay, if you give the quota, then you are protecting your local industry so that we can make progress. Let's also bear in mind that we have AFTA, and we also want to take advantage of the area. Like Godfrey indicated earlier, that the fact that you host the AFTA Secretariat here doesn't mean that you are going to win. If you are not careful, others will make the benefits as against us. And so rice, chicken, and fruit juice, we expect that whatever Ministry of Trade is putting together as in quota, as in protection, restriction for industry to produce, it should be done. They should stay by their word.
Okay.
Because I came up with a question that over the years, we've had government promising, giving assurances that, well, this is what we're going to do for this sector. And I'll give you the automotive industry as an example.
Yeah.
Somebody will say, we're sitting out somewhere. When you brought assembling, local assembling, and they bought into it.
Yeah.
And these companies have invested millions of dollars
Yeah.
into building assembly plants all over.
Yeah.
VW went into it, Toyota did,
There are
Japan
actually
Motors
8
did.
now. There are
Yes.
8 of them.
All of them are in there. And the assurance was that start producing, and we are going to increase import duty of vehicles to 35%.
Yeah.
Just so that we'll give you some respite to be able to sell. In the midst of it, it's been almost 2 years down the line. This 35% import duty has not come on board. And this is the situation where you are assembling and you are stocking them in your yard. You can't sell. At the end of the day, the plant has to go on recess. You shut the plant down because you can't keep on producing when you cannot sell.
buying.
So this plant goes on recess, and these are skilled staff you can't let go. So they sit idle, and you pay them salary. And so we are asking that if we are going to do this with rice, then government should make do their word. Apart from that, we are asking government to do a holistic approach.
Okay.
Since we are talking of the food industry, Ministry of Agric has a role to play in there. At the same time, government has introduced excise tax, 20% on fruit juice. So let's look at the value chain. I was happy Abner mentioned planting for food and jobs. So we did planting for food and jobs. And then after the planting, the food could not get onto the market. So these are household. The food could not get onto the market for the household. What about industries?
Okay.
We were here when we realized that food was being sent to the ministries because we said food prices were high. And we knew that it was unsustainable. And indeed, it wasn't. After a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, over. So what happens to it? If you go to the farms, the foodstuff are there getting rotten. Industry steps in to process this foodstuff, convert them into fruit juice. And these are local fruits grown in Ghanaian soil
So like
and being
eco
processed.
juice, for example.
Exactly. So Ekunfe is there, Blue Skies is there, and there are other SMEs, small juice coming
Sawam
up.
Cannery.
You understand me?
Yeah.
Then you say, I'm taxing you 20%, excise tax. So one sits back and asks, what is the plan? Is it just to stifle
Yeah.
the productive sector? Sometimes it makes you feel that, well, maybe there's an alternative to what is being done. Perhaps we are projecting one thing, and behind the scenes,
Yeah.
we want another result.
Doesn't make sense.
And so this thing has to be done with these 3 ministries together. Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Agric, Ministry of Trade and Industry. So that when they say they are protecting farmers or millers, I recall Dr. Ejapon, is that a name for Zoom Lion?
Yes.
Yes.
Sian Ejapon.
Sian Ejapon. So he came in to say, well, I am a new entrant. I have no idea about this, but I've done some studies,
Yeah.
and I'm coming in. I am not coming in to compete. I am coming in to complement.
Yeah.
And so if we have this working, then manufacturers can concentrate on their manufacturing and pass it on to traders for the trading space.
All right.
But every now and then there has been the fear, and that's why most of the time you find AGI and GUTA at each other's neck,
Yeah.
because they feel that, look, this is where I get my daily bread from. I've been doing this business for ages, and I can't stop just because Ghana must grow through industry. And so we are saying that we will concentrate on our manufacturing,
All right.
take the trading space, and we'll pass it on to you
Wow.
as key distributors.
Thank you. Thank you. Put your hands together for. I mean, the level of clarity is incredible. You know, when the economy messes you up, it gives you a certain level of, you know, everything you said is a headline. It's powerful. Yeah, I have a question for you. Since you are the financial advisory guy, you know the financial sector. We know that when they released their first quarter or last year results, they were all forced to release it by March or so, whatever. A lot of them, DDE, wiped out everything they had, okay? So they are not optimistic. From your research, the financial sector is least optimistic. Yet they answered your questions the most. My question generally is there not a cloud in this silver lining for them? Because a lot of us felt like what they were doing prior to debt exchange was not sustainable. Like, you have 70% of your interest income from government securities. You are a bank, for God's sake. You are not lending to anybody. You are basically just sitting there and giving money to different governments, and they are just giving it back to you, and you are reporting profit. You won't give money to Esiama, you won't give money to Seth, you won't give money to anybody. So it serves them right in a way. That's how I see it, right? Now, it serves them right, not just that, but also it is going to force them to say, okay, I need a real place to put money. So venture capital financing, private equity, we are going into the stock exchange. They are thinking, pension funds. So my question to you is that, is there a cloud in this financial mess that the DDEP has created for the financial institutions? Is there some positive thing that will come out of it?
Yeah, thank you. I think in every opportunity or in every problem you have opportunities, and that's a fact. And I've debated this with some of the financial sector players, that historically you see significant portion of their interest income from government securities. And some of the placement are also with government securities. And it's not only about the banks, but all the players in the financial sector. The insurance companies were doing the same thing. Asset management companies were doing the same thing. So when it hits one side, it's not only the banking sector that suffered. All the others in the value chain suffered. And for those in the industry sector, they will be excited because they have always been chasing for this credit, but they were not getting. Now it's time for us to rethink. And we should force the financial sector to do that. Because in the insurance sector or asset management, there was a certain percentage that we're supposed to invest or keep in government security because it's a risk-free asset. Now it is not as risk-free as you always thought. So the businesses that you are assessing, that you are avoiding to lend, they are less risky than government. That's a fact. And so look at those businesses and stop avoiding them. Give the money to them and rethink how to do it. I was talking to someone recently and he said, look, there's a lot of money coming to Africa. And the person asked, have you asked where the money is coming from? Then someone said, they are all coming from Russia. They are under sanctions and they are rethinking. You are going through challenges. Think, you find a way around it. And I think that's the message for the financial sector.
The second question there is, whilst they may start shifting their attention to Ghanaian companies, we are in a very high interest rate environment. And the government's monetary policy doesn't seem to be working because of points Prof has already made. What are we misunderstanding about inflation and interest rates? Because it seems, I mean, look, if the BOG's inflation target rate is 8 plus or minus 2. I mean, that's ridiculous. You are in 42%, and that's even like supposed to be a trough from December. And yet your inflation target is 8 plus or minus. Should we just admit that ours is a high interest rate, high inflation industry and plan around that? Should we just scrap inflation targeting? Why? Because even if you say you are going to lend to her, the rate at which you lend to her, she won't even collect the money. Do you understand me? So the solution you give me is just half of the solution, because if you are giving her a loan and you are going to charge her 28%, why is she going to, what does she do that she will get more than 28%? Do you understand me? So what are your thoughts around the high interest rate environment, high inflation environment, and what needs to be done for that bottleneck to be unraveled?
Yeah, I think we should look at the fundamentals and then address the problem from the fundamental level. So these banks are financial intermediation people. So they take money from one person and give to other. So the money they are taking, if it's expensive, they will price it at a higher rate. So the question we should be asking is, are the monies that they are getting cheaper? Then they should be forced to lend at a cheaper rate. But if the pricing on what they are getting or the funds they are getting is expensive, then they will lend at an expensive rate. Because they have stakeholders and they must give value to their stakeholders. So if you deposit money with a bank, if you do a fixed deposit, and the bank is giving you 2% a year, you will scream. But if the same bank is giving you 30%, you will continue to invest in fixed deposits. So those who are giving to the banks, if they are asking for more, the banks will ask for more from businesses. And that's because we are struggling to find where to invest money. So we are giving money to where it's very expensive. So we are creating the vicious cycle. So I think one way to look at it is look at the pricing for deposit, pricing for funds. the sources of funds are very expensive. So if the sources of funds are expensive, you look at. And then the other thing is to do a proper credit assessment of the people who apply for credit. Ghana may be borrowing at 9%, but there will be an entity in Ghana here that will borrow a dollar facility at 3%. Why? Because the credit risk of that entity is lower than government.
Okay.
So you lend to Bernard, you lend to Kwame. You can lend to Bernard at 3%, you lend to Kwame at 30%, because Kwame is more risky. But if you do a blanket approach and say my minimum rate is 25%, regardless of who Bernard is, you do a minimum of 25%. That doesn't help. So if you do proper credit assessment of the businesses that we are working with, you will find out that businesses that are credit worthy will get interest rate that's cheaper or relatively cheaper. And businesses that are risky will get a higher rate. So if you don't do that proper assessment and you put a blanket rate and say 20% minimum, regardless of the entity, even if the guy is credit worthy, the highest AA rated, you are still giving to that person at 20%, then you create the distortion.
Wonderful. Please put your hands together for the panel. I've done 2 questions for each of you. I have 1 question for you though, but I just felt like, look, it's getting some way. I need you guys to come in, right? I mean, so please, do you have any questions or comments where the discussion is going? So it's more exciting. So I'm going to go to that table. We'll start there. We can take like 3 or 4. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment. It can be a disagreement. It can be a speech. Just I should do it in like a minute and a half. So get the mics there. I had a question for you about the election and whether, in a sense, they are giving us all these difficult things because they want to create space for the election. Because it's a weird IMF program. It's a year and a half to an election. So maybe they want to front load the difficulty so that by August next year, things are better so we can vote for them again. Maybe that's what I'm seeing as a journalist. I don't know. So think about it. It's a question I have for you. But let's take some questions. Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks, Bella. The panelists. Yeah, I just want to contribute to the last question with regards to the interest rate.
Yes.
And what can be done. The market is all about demand and supply.
Yeah.
And you did mention that if you look at the books of the banks, when you look at the composition of their interest income, majority of it is coming from the government instrument.
Yeah.
Now, the government itself needs money and is broke. And so the government will offer higher rates to be able to map up the money that is within the system. That in itself would create a higher interest rate in the environment. If you notice some years back, maybe when this government came into power, T-bill rate and others were very high. And at some point, it dropped. When it dropped, it also affected interest rate. Interest rate dropped because what it means is that the amount a bank will be willing to pay to an investor or a depositor in terms of deposits their interest on deposits will be lower because you want to benchmark against the T-bill. And what is the T-bill rate? If the T-bill rate is higher, of course, you want more. But if the T-bill rate drops, automatically what that means is that the interest you will be paying to the depositor will be low. And by extension, the cost of borrowing would equally drop. So I think the solution is not just about it's a demand and supply thing, but it is based on our current fiscal structure. If that is changed, we will address the cost of borrowing. In fact, some years back, I know one of our neighboring countries, interest rate was high. And it got to a point that the government had to take a decision to say, look, I think we need to find other means of funding our internal, projects and stuff. And then what it meant, there was a drop in interest rate. The market had a lot of money that they could not they were lending at some point at a single digit because there was so much money. And that was what led to some of them creatively coming up with the margin loans, where they will say, you have money with me. Just come, I'll give you loan to buy my shares. That was what they were doing because there was excess liquidity. So I think we need to get to a point where there will be a relief to some extent. Government taking from the market, if it reduces, automatically the banks will drop the rate. And
let me just ask you, so does the government force you to... But it's like an offer, right?
Yes.
So I guess I can say, but we're also saying that your job as a bank is financial intermediation.
Yes.
And you are supposed to boost private sector growth. So you are right. The government is the one that brings the temptation. But you can also control yourself.
Bernard, you and I,
yes,
from where we sit, the bank would rate you as a higher risk based on limited data on us. However, the government, they will say, come NPP, come NDC, you give money to government, government will pay back until recently. And so it was deemed to be a risk-free investment. So I would rather give the money to government than to give to Bernard and I. So I think we need to get to a point where, even as the banks, in restructuring how we lend out monies to individuals, it has to move from collateral base to more of cash flow base, and getting involved in some of the businesses that would significantly impact the economy. In some cases, you may want to lend. The organization may not even have that collateral that you want to look at. But when you look at the cash flow and getting involved and controlling the source of repayment, it automatically minimizes the risk, especially the repayment risk. And then you can decide to give some concessionary rate because the risk rate is down. So that is it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your contribution. There's one behind you. Can I just see by hand anybody who wants to make a comment? Okay, so two more. Wonderful. Yeah. Then those of you online, I'll come to you as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Selassie. I would like to combine, I think Prof, Madam Adobia and Yao, they mentioned something. For me, I see inflation as a lag indicator. It is consequences of what we do that brings about inflation. So the work Yao and some of us we do, we match those who need funding to those who have the deficit to the surplus unit. But those in the buy side, they always want to give money to companies or those who need funds and don't have problems. The Ghanaian economy is in a challenge. So it will be difficult to also find a business who is not facing a challenge to lend to. But like Prof said, we have to be deliberate. We have to look at the sustainable rate to lend to businesses to see them improve in their cash conversion cycles. They are able to generate more revenue or more operational revenue, which they are able to easily repay their interest payments and subsequently the principal, whether it is bullet payment or amortized. So I think for me the question is, how are banks able to raise enough deposits, lend to their staff 10% or lower, but the industry, we are challenged with 30% upwards. That's where I'd like to end. Yeah,
that's a good question. You didn't direct the question, but I know there are some bank MDs here. And as they say, if you are a bank MD here, he's asking a question. How are you able to lend to your staff at such low rates and the rest of us, we pay so much? And I also know some banks have started 10% interest thing to agribusiness. So it means that there's a positive consequence of what has happened. They are looking for innovative ways of lending at lower rates. And 10% is much lower than even the indicative rate. And yet a big bank in Ghana is doing it. It means lower rates is possible. So please come to the middle. Please, where's the mic? Yes, there are two gentlemen in tie. Then, please, if you are online, you have a question. After these two questions, I'll take your comment. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Patrick. I used to be in the banking industry. I'm now in the agri sector.
Okay.
So you were asking the AGI lady, why is it that some of the industries are not buying locally and then keep importing? Prof mentioned in his presentation that we are highly inefficient when it comes to production.
Yeah.
And my little experience with the agri sector is that we are highly inefficient. Now, let's take flour. I'm consulting for a flour milling company also. So I just did a research to find out how come we are not using the grain of millet to add to flour, combine them, that's composite flour, to reduce the importation and also to reduce the cost.
Yeah.
It turned out that in Ghana, our productivity for millet is about 1.5 ton of millet per acre. If you go to Burkina Faso here, it's about 3.2 tons.
Wow.
So you can imagine. Now, I did the costing, and it will cost us around $650 to buy a ton of millet in Ghana here, compared to you buying wheat imported with freight and everything charged, just around $450 per metric ton. Wow. So, if we don't make a deliberate attempt, as Prof said, look, let's target, let's say, look, this is what we want to do. Millet growing here, what kind of
so can I ask you a question?
This thing that you need?
What are the Burkinabes doing that we are not doing? Did you
exactly.
find out? Did you try
I've
to
not
find
been.
out?
I've not been there, but my point is, I also hear that we buy tomato and things from Burkina.
Yeah.
So it means they are doing something. This is technology. Yeah. So if the Ministry of Agric can deliberately say, look, we want to reduce our import of wheat, and then combine it with millet, what are the issues?
Or even cassava flour.
Cassava flour, the cost of, cassava is more of the water in it. The energy to take the water out to dry it makes it more expensive.
So
millet is already dry.
Yeah,
it's a grain that is dry.
Yeah.
And it has some qualities closer to wheat. So we just have to also look long term. We may start now, but develop the taste. Because we have acquired the taste for high quality flour.
Yeah.
Ghana, to some extent, import the best of wheat in West Africa. The Francophone countries, they import the cheapest wheat.
And they mix it.
Exactly. And you see that their bread is different from
ours. So we have high taste, but we can't be productive.
Exactly.
We are just,
but then we have developed this over time. So I put a point here, as Prof was making, that look, we need to think long term.
Yeah.
Medium to long term is the way. Else we will go back to this IMF back and forth, because almost every 4 or 5 years we are going back.
All right.
We are marking time, we are going back and forth. So I think we need to look at it. And then one key thing that as a country we lack is discipline.
Yeah.
From top down. Financial discipline is not there.
Yeah.
Look at the way we build around.
Basa. And yet we want to eat bread, which is nice.
We want to do everything top range. But I think we need to do something about it. Thank you.
Charlie, it's a very serious matter. You import quality wheat. You can't produce too. You talk plenty. Charlie, thank you for your comment. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Bernard. My name is Atajan. My question flows from the presentation by Prof.
Yeah.
On the external debt. He indicated, the breakdown indicated that the multilateral debt amounted to some 10-point-something billion dollars. The bilateral, that's the multilateral. The bilateral is 5.4 billion, and then we have the commercial, about 14.6. Out of the 10 multilateral, 8.8 billion is out of scope for restructuring because they are not. And yet in the IMF solution, we are looking to add to that. So IMF is bringing 3 billion, the World Bank 1.5 billion, and these are going to add to the ones that we don't touch when it comes to debt treatment. In banking, when we are lending, and we are lending in dollars, we make sure that the borrower also earns in dollars.
Simple.
In Ghana, if you look at the debt profile, I think a higher percentage is in foreign currency.
Yes.
And in the PC peg, we are yet to see measures to revamp foreign exchange earnings. Because even if the external creditors waive 50% of the 20 billion that is up for restructuring, the remaining 10 billion has to be serviced. And we need the reserves to service it. At the moment, it appears that anytime you see our reserve has gone up, it's through borrowing. How are we going to get out of that cycle and have real programs that improve our foreign exchange earnings so that the debt can become truly sustainable? That is the first question. The second question is...
The questions are long, pal.
This will be brief. We have been asked to burden share in the domestic debt treatment.
Yeah.
And so for the past 5 years, I've been saving and investing in bonds.
Yeah.
I've been made to make a very, very significant sacrifice.
Haircut.
My colleague here didn't invest in bonds. He invested in real estate.
He's left you behind.
So he has so many houses.
You are here.
He is not burden sharing.
At all.
We are not collecting property rate. Look at Accra, all over.
Yeah.
They have announced tax programs
Yeah.
in the successive budgets. We lack the political will to implement. People own, I'm sure you own about 2 or 3.
Me?
Yes. But you don't pay property tax.
You are prophesying.
How do we ramp up our revenue so we can mobilize some taxes from there to be able to service the debt at least?
My comment,
I wish Abena was here anyway.
My comment is that these programs is not necessarily a Q&A. These are rich discussions. Everything is being captured. It will be available online. So don't be worried that Abena doesn't have all the answers. Trust me, she doesn't. So don't worry that she's not here. Say what you want to say. It's live online. It's streaming. They will read it. They will hear it. Somebody will put it in their manifesto. So just talk, right? It's not, if politicians don't know as much as you think they do. Let me take Samuel Harry Akute online and also Bawa Manaf. So Samuel, if you can hear us, put your mic on and let's hear you. Hello, Samuel. Okay, Bawa Manaf, are you there? Okay. Mauli Lavoe. Okay, look, if your hand is up, just talk. It keeps changing, so okay, we have to unmute them. It's a bit technical, but just bear with us. Is that Emmanuel Saforo? Have you unmuted Saforo? Or he has to unmute from his end? I think he's talking, but the volume is low. Oh? He's not talking at all? All right. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I will read comments they sent in. Or you've deleted the comments. They sent comments. You deleted them. Okay. Okay, while we figure this out, I'll probably read some of their comments, but I'll invite Prof to. There's a lot of things being said, and you've been quiet for too long. So if you can react to some of the points that have been made. Generally, I'm asking about whether the timing of the election is why we are being squeezed so much, so that hopefully in a year's time, things will be better. Is there any scenario in which by Q3 2024, things are a bit better for citizens on the fiscal side?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, given the 2024 election, there was an incentive to front load some of those adjustments so that we are able to free up some space. But also, what informed the front loading is also where we found ourselves. We checked in a very vulnerable state. So Ghana's one was an emergency situation, right? So you see that before our document went to the board, some of the front loading were actually prior actions. We needed to even start those processes. And actually, if you look at the planned utility adjustment in the next 3 years, right, unless maybe for the sake of the election, we pull a break so that the election management can go through. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a real risk, right? It's a real risk. And it will not be a modern day concept because the 16th IMF supported program also ran across the 2016 election. Yeah. So what happened then was that the limited progress that the program made in the first year of implementation, we effectively used the 2016 election to undo all of that. So by the time we're done with the 2016 election, the IMF program was off track. To bring it back, we had to make a case for extension. So the 16th IMF program, instead of ending April 2018, we had to extend it for 1 more year to April 2019 in order to meet a lot of the program objectives. And even with that, we couldn't achieve the objectives, right? But Bernard, this is the interesting thing, and we haven't focused our attention on that. If you look at the debt restructuring we are doing, what we are doing is to actually move the traffic, like the way we manage traffic in Ghana. If traffic is on the Kasua-Winneba Road and the traffic peaks at, let's say, Kasua, we put an interchange there. And actually, all that we have done is not to eliminate the traffic on that road, actually, to move it from that joint
to Bujumbura.
To the, yes. So you make some savings on your way to, let's say, Kasua, and then you go and dissipate that savings from Bujumbura. So on the stretch from here to Cape Coast, effectively, you have not done anything. So look at what we've done. If you look at the reprofiling they have done, is to actually shift the burden of the debt from now, 2024, to whoever wins 2024 and beyond. Now, if you do the modeling, unless the rate of economic growth improves significantly post-2025, towards the end of 2025, 2026, Ghana will come back to the table on debt restructuring. Because if you look at the clustering of the maturity profile, from 2025, we'll actually start paying. Okay, so if the cash flow generation capacity of the economy does not improve from that level, we will come back to this.
So in that sense, is it good that we've been shut out of the international market? And should it continue? So can we say, for the next 3 years, don't go and take any dollar loan of a non-concessionary nature because for what you've just said?
Yeah, I mean, the program itself says that the earliest we can go to the international capital market is 2027.
Even if we get that chance, should we go?
So look at it this way. You know, African leaders have been crying that the global financial architecture is anti-Africa.
Yes.
What is the main game? So that they can go and borrow at a lower cost, maybe like other countries. What is the motive? You will see that previously we were doing more bilateral. Ghana had almost $3 billion facility with China.
Yeah.
It was not enjoyable drawing down on that. You know why? Because of the conditionalities.
Yeah.
Show us the project you want to invest in and all of that. But now, so African leaders found that uncomfortable.
So they
but
moved
then
to the...
when they go to the Eurobond, and then they mobilize the money, and we do the Kenke party.
Nobody asks them anything.
Nobody asks them anything. So they spend it the way they want to spend it. Look, China, our total indebtedness to them is $1.9 billion. But there's underlying infrastructure.
Yes.
We have taken $14.6 billion from the Eurobond market. Let somebody tell us, what did we do for it? How did we use it? Okay, borrowing in finance is not a sin. After borrowing, it can end up as a good debt or a bad debt. It becomes a bad debt if you don't have a justifiable underlying cash flow to support your debt. And that's why some countries, their debt to GDP ratio is more than 200%.
Yeah.
And they are not weeping as much as Ghana and the others. Because if you invest it in enhancing the productive capacity of the economy, you will enhance the cash flow generation capacity of the economy, and your debt servicing will not be a problem. What we have done, and I'm sure we have successfully blamed the banks, but the banks are rational economic agents. Let's look at it also from a regulatory point of view. The kind of interest rate regime we have created in Ghana is only the government that can borrow at that interest rate.
Yep.
Because the government borrowing is not sensitive to interest rate. Okay? But the private sector business model is sensitive to what? Interest rate. Then look at it from Bank of Ghana. If banks lend to Ghana government, it's risk-weighted at 0.
All right.
If they lend to any other industry, sometimes it's risk-weighted at 200%, 100%. That's implication for capital provision. That's implication for return on equity. So if we want to, we have to create that incentive, right? People respond to incentives that enable banks to direct funding to the critical areas that we want them to. Otherwise, banks are not lotto doctors. Okay.
Thank you very much for your input. I just read a couple of questions here. We don't have a lot of time. We have something else to do before the program ends. So what I'll just do is read one or two, just to acknowledge the very rich number of people we have online. This one is from somebody called Mabunda Mashiane. He says, there is an expectation from the IMF that Ghana Cocoa Board's cocoa bills refinancing needs to be run in tandem, or at least in parallel to a business turnaround. What are the key levers of this business turnaround, and how will the cocoa farmers, LBCs, and current trade creditors of Ghana Cocoa Board be treated in this business turnaround? It's a great question. I don't know who to give the question to, but Deloitte, you can organize another event on this, and we'll be happy to come and discuss it, the cocoa thing. But it's a great question. Another one that came in says, what is the government's considered view on managing the liabilities and overall solvency of its key state-owned entities, with the view that any turbulence in their financial performance and potentially shaking capital structures do not filter into the government's fiscal stability and goals? Again, there's a minister for public sector. We interviewed him a couple of days ago. There's a lot happening in that space. You may want to, who is your public sector guy? You may want to start engaging, because the public sector is a big space. There was even a discussion around debt equity swaps, where a lot of the liabilities of these companies could be turned into equity, which can reduce government involvement, better management. So Deloitte, I think you are credible enough to organize a discussion around how to turn around our state agencies financially, bringing in money and all that. So this panel may not be able to answer this, but these are very legitimate questions as well. Now, I want to close, right? So what I want to do is I'll take a final comment from each of you. Then I'll hand over for the next steps as we go ahead. So since, Prof, you've spoken a lot, I won't give you the mic again. George, I'll give you your final thoughts. Any reaction to any question, and what are your closing remarks?
Okay, thank you, Bernard. So I think that we have AGI here, and they have spoken and raised significant concerns that needs to be looked at. And from the presentation by Yao, that's the Deloitte presentation, it came out clear that, and I think Prof's presentation also alluded to that industry is really not doing well, agri sector and industry not doing well. I think these are the two sectors that I believe that a lot of efforts needs to be put in. How do we do this? By ensuring that incentives are created, tax incentives are created for these sectors to be able to attract investment into those sectors, because most often investors who want to look at the sectors that they are going, is there something that will encourage my investment in these sectors? And I think AGI even mentioned the fact that if you look at import duties of raw materials and how much they are paying, you are front-loading the tax before they even come out with the production. So government should start looking at how do we turn the tax system around so that we tax it at the end of production, so that we are able to be on the same platform like items or goods that we import from other countries, so that we are more competitive, because we have businesses that also produce for export. And if you look at it, why are we not exporting more? It's because our exports are not competitive on the global market. It becomes more expensive, and you see that it's even sometimes cheaper for some people to import than to produce locally. And so the manufacturing sector is not really doing well. You see it clearly from, if you pass the industrial areas, you see how these sectors are going down. And I believe that there's the need for a lot of efforts to be put in terms of incentives to attract investment in these sectors, because it's not just about how much you get immediately, but the sustainability of what you are going to get from them. Because if these sectors are dying, then it means you will not get the taxes you are looking for. Don't forget the fact that as you sustain the sector, there is employment, and these employees are going to also generate taxes. There is going to be more revenue, and for which you are able to get more taxes for same. And I think one other concern that we have mentioned here is about the levies and how it's impacting the industry sector. That needs to be looked at in terms of how the levy has become a cost. Even if the combined levy and the VAT system could be put together to make it a bit even increase to 17%, 18%, just to ensure that there is that in and out system to allow the recovery of the costs. But to put the 6% on the P&L of businesses, I think is significant and could significantly affect their survival over time. And last but not the least, I want to say that the GRM, for that matter, the government has done a lot in terms of digitization. The survey also alluded to that. But I think there's also the need to do more because we say that the reward for good work is more work. And so the data that the GRA and for that matter the government is getting from this digitized platform that they have created, they should be able to use it to enhance the tax collection system, make it more efficient, to be able to bring in more or expand the tax net, and then be able to reduce the taxes that or the impact that the few people that are paying are suffering from.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Let's take Edobia from AGI. Your closing thoughts.
Thank you once again. As industry, we're coming back to the taxes. And one of the taxes that we want to see gone is the COVID levy.
Must go.
COVID levy must go.
COVID must go.
WHO says it is no more a pandemic. It's endemic. It's here with us.
Yeah.
Just like malaria, just like any other thing, TB. So it must go. But maybe government may say, well, we incurred some costs during COVID, and so we have to hold on for a while to recoup the expenditure done at the time. And industry is saying it's a matter of principle. It came in at a point of crisis. And so if the crisis is over, let it go, because it is costing us. If we merge this VAT, the 6% and the 15%, you realize that 1% saving is gone. If we add COVID, 2% savings is gone. And for industry, 2% means a lot to us. But then we would also come to the fact that solving this problem has two options. Either we mobilize revenue or we cut expenditure. And so where we are loading up so much taxes on industry, on the productive sector, and it is not helping, knowing that is going to stifle investment, let's cut costs. That is where we expect that expenditure will be streamlined. There will be some rationalization so that government will also equally take a hit, a very hard one. And I'll give you a simple story. I was buying a shoe for my little boy. When and there were two available. When he saw them, he was very excited. Oh, mommy, I want this. I'll wear this here and I'll wear that here. I said, okay, you have money, so pay. Then he says, am I paying it by myself? I said, yes. You pay it yourself because you've gotten money. Your uncle gave you money recently. Immediately, the boy says, I don't want two. I want only one. So if they are equally taking a hit and feeling what we are feeling, perhaps things will change. And I'm saying this because as industry, we are very interested in the rail sector. A whole ministry was set up for railways. Land rail, we couldn't refurbish it. Buankra Inland Port has been sitting for almost 2 decades. We haven't been able to sort it out. Then we say we are doing sky rail. And we spent $2 million for what? Feasibility studies. Charlie. So these are some of the things we should look at.
Charlie.
And I think that maybe Seth wouldn't want me to say this.
Charlie,
but I'll say this.
Free your mind. Free your mind.
You see, when issues of corruption come up,
yeah,
let's fix it.
Yeah.
We have loopholes, so many of them.
Yes, madam.
And if we are able to plug these loopholes, I don't think we'll get to where we are. Perhaps, maybe I'm equally interested in procurement. They should put me somewhere in procurement, and let's see how things will turn out. Wow. So, to wind up, we are saying that government should make a deliberate attempt to support the productive sector, and in this, we are expecting that some funds should have been voted to the Development Bank, to Exim, to support industries, so that we'll be able to survive, employ, generate the revenue, and pay taxes.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Final comment, Yao.
Yeah, okay.
Apialate.
Yes, so 2 quick comments. So first one is on our debt. So I've seen some kind of development happening, particularly in the African region. Some countries are being forced to develop what we call a debt cost and sustainability model. So I've seen that in South Africa and I've seen that in Gambia. And that is something that as a country we should be thinking about. We should have an independently administered debt sustainability model.
Okay.
So it is not something that is influenced by governments, But whenever we think of going to the Eurobond, that model is assessed and stress tested, whether we can accommodate even a dollar of an Eurobond. So it has to be independently managed, not at the government cycles, because you know that it's very capable of being influenced. So independently assess their sustainability model. The second one is on the state enterprises. So the Minister of Public Sector Reforms announced recently that they are delisting about 17 companies. And some of them are going to be restructured, liquidated, and others gone through the reforms that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And some will even be listed on the Ghana Stock Exchange. I think it's a very good idea, and it's a welcoming news. What we need to be mindful of, those that have to be liquidated, we should have the political will to liquidate them. In one instance, he said there's a tomato factory. If you go there, it's just a bungalow. How can a factory be just a bungalow? What can you manufacture there? So if there are some that have to be liquidated, we should have the political will to liquidate them. And those that we want to list on the stock exchange, we should create a vibrant market for people to invest in them. The last time we had a bullish investment is just when MTN listed. After the MTN listing, I've not seen any. So if you take any of these companies to the stock exchange, you may not get the interest as you expect. That is something that we should look. We should have the political will to run this. And the last one is we should allow these companies to run and operate efficiently without political interference. We have instances where political appointees to boards are acting almost like CEOs. They take control of management, and these are political appointees. And you can mention all the companies that have failed in the past. Ghana Airways is political interference. We should allow these companies to operate efficiently, because as Prof said, part of our problem is governance cost. Some of these institutions have like 3 or 4 CEOs, but they are not returning profits. So why do you have 3 or 4 CEOs and yet you're not posting any profit? So that governance cost must be addressed by addressing the issue of state-owned enterprises. Thank you.
Put your hands together for the panel. We've been hearing Yao Api Alate with Deloitte Financial Advisory. We have been hearing Adobia Esiamu Abuaji, AGI. We've also been hearing George Ankoma, tax partner, Deloitte, and Professor Godfrey Boppin. Thank you, gentlemen and lady. Please take your seat. Want to acknowledge some key dignitaries. We invited the CEOs of some banks. If they are here, you can just give me a wave. The Bank of Africa, CRO, Akofa Dankwa. Are you here? Okay. We also have Fidelity Bank, DMD, Atta Jan. I think he asked the question already. EcoBank Finance Director, Dr. Edward Bochwe. Are you still here? EcoBank Finance Director. UBA CEO, Mr. Chris Ofikulu. UBA CEO, Deloitte Africa Leader for Operate, Larato Sitole. Is she still here? Good to see you, madam. Thank you very much. Deloitte Africa Leader for Forensics, Antonio Poe. Wonderful. MD for Ascend Digital, Angela Onwunka. All right. And then UMB CEO, Nana Jemo Bene. I think I saw him at the back at some point. GCB CEO, Mr. Kofi Adumaku. Put your hands together for all of them. Thank you so much for being here. 2 quick announcements. We want to really know how to improve these programs because they will be more regular. So we have a document on your table which has a QR code. Just take your phone and open the app that can scan it, or just, if you have a good phone, the camera itself will... No, what I'm saying is that there are some phones that the camera itself is a QR code scanner. Otherwise, you download the QR code scanner app, and then within a few seconds, you can fill the questions. These are very important input for us. Those of you who are watching us virtually as well, you can click on the link to do the scan. This is very important. I saw some food outside. We've already paid for it, so you have to eat it. So we beg you to please eat the food. Spend some time to network as well. The value of these programs is not just in all that's been said, but in the quality of those who are here. So exchange a card, meet somebody who knows. You can get a loan from a bank. Before we go, even less, I want to invite, where did I put the name? Sewa Atiase Jogbenuku, is that the name? To close the program properly. So put your hands together for Sewa. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Good morning to everybody. Wow. That was some webinar, some discussion. At a point, I had goosebumps because I was trying to, when Prof was speaking, I was trying to think into the future, the implications of all that he was saying, and it was quite amazing. What can I say? You have spoken. We have listened, or we have heard. The government says they are listening. Fingers crossed. I mean, the Deputy Minister herself said that she would take all of this, the feedback from the survey, and today's discussions, you'll take it under advisement, consider it, if not in the budget that will be read, the mid-year budget review next week, in subsequent budget discussions. Don't forget that we have next year's budget to be read towards the end of the year, and so the lesson from this is keep attending Deloitte events, keep participating in Deloitte surveys, let your voice be heard. Because eventually, if he keeps repeating the same message over and over again, it will drum home, it will go home. So let's keep at it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'd like to thank our special guests. Everybody in this room was handpicked to be here. So everybody here is a special guest, and we are grateful for making the time to be here. Thank you so much. And to those of you online, you are actually the backbone of this event. Everything in today's world is digital. You are making us trend this morning. Thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your feedback. We have stakeholders from all walks of life, industry, academia, government. Thank you for making the time. As Bernard said, we need your feedback. We need to be better next time. So tell us what you think. What didn't you like? What did you like? How can we make this better? What do you want to see next time? If you are here, please scan this, as Bernard said. Scan this with your phones or download the app if your phone is not able to pick it up automatically. If you're online, look into the chat and click the link. Thank you, and thank you once again.
And by the way, we can eat in here, so the food is warm. So please bring the food and come and eat. Thank you. We'll see you next time. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Fundamental